All right. Welcome to the A's Philosophy YouTube channel. I am A, and I had some time to try and get a discussion going, if possible, if participants are willing to engage. I was partaking in a conversation earlier on the Objective Ethics YouTube channel, where I like that channel because it's a place where a variety of viewpoints are allowed to speak their mind. And anytime you have discussions, things are going to get a little bit chaotic. You're going to have people talking over each other. You're going to have people probably getting emotional and saying things, attacking people personally, but that's unavoidable. The point is, uh, you know, anyone who's allowing people of various viewpoints to speak is doing better than a lot of other people on YouTube. And I say that as someone who's been banned from probably a lot more Christian channels than even skeptical or atheist channels. But because, well, I guess people on our sides have thin skin, and there's a couple in each group that are willing to actually have conversations. My 12-day Match Fest just started. Choose Jesus, Yeshua today. Good to see you, Mike. I am happy to hear that, Mike. I am sorry to say that I'm not exactly sure what a Mach Fest is. Let me look that up real fast. Mach, see this. Mach Fest. Is that a real thing? All right. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. Anyways, good to see you, Mike. So I was having a conversation. Oh, matzah. Okay, matzah, matzah. Okay. Oh, okay. So it's a type of food. Or wait. So it's like a feast of some sort. Matzah fest. Gotcha. Okay. Anyways, well, thank you, Mike. Thank you for being here. Anyways, and we were discussing originally when I was there. So the conversation, I was only there for a portion of the conversation. So after I left, I don't know, but we were discussing evolution versus creation, which I think is an incredibly important topic for people to think about, because my analysis or my I have had a number of conversations about with skeptics and atheists about this very question, and this question is this: if evolution is false, then some God necessarily exists. And my experience is that atheists usually react with they strongly reject that claim, that assertion, that argument. They say, no, evolution actually doesn't have anything to do with God. Even if evolution was falsified, it still wouldn't mean there's a God. And it certainly wouldn't mean that it's the Christian God, Yahweh. And while I can agree with them on the second point, I disagree. I think that if evolution is proven false, then we know that some guiding intelligence is necessary for life on Earth to exist. And so I see them, and I think that implicitly, so they know this, which is why they defend it and they hold on to it, which is why it kind of is, in a sense, religious, in the sense that it's something that you hold on to, not necessarily because it's something that you know is true, but rather because it is a necessary element of your worldview. And I'm willing to have that discussion. I also had a conversation on a Christian channel a couple of days ago, maybe it was even yesterday. I won't mention the channel. Well, maybe I will. It was the Teach Yahweh channel with Kanisha, and I'm not this. So I don't want to make this anything about Kanisha or anyone that was part of that panel. But I will say on that channel, the typical modern Christian viewpoint of how salvation is attained is promoted, which is that basically humans can't attain to salvation on their own. They can't enter into right relationship with God on their own, so they need a savior. And God's plan, because men are inherent, humans are inherently sinful, was to send his son, who is God. So God sent, not that any of this actually makes sense, but this is just what's taught. God sent his son, who also is God, but they're the same being. It's all one being, but there's one person of God sending another person of the Godhead to do something on earth. And God, and what God did, what he said, humanity has a sin nature. So, oh, there's objective ethics right there. Having to stop by the show today, it got a little heated, which is probably my fault for not reading things, but I felt you all felt equally passionate about. Yeah, and that's my fault. Objective. I did think afterwards. I felt a little bit of regret about my behavior. I was a little bit. I think the problem was I was more interruptive, and probably the tone could have been a little more gentle. So I was not on my best behavior, and that's something that's a flaw that I've had. If you go back and watch old videos of me on YouTube, I mean, I really flew off the handle a lot and just went berserk. And I think I've gotten better, but every once in a while I do lose control. But I don't think you did a bad job. There's Andy. Good to see Andy. I don't think you did a bad job. At some point, you kind of got to let other people police themselves until it gets too chaotic. And I don't think things ever got too chaotic. Now, when you have 8 people on a panel and they're disagreeing with one another, things are going to get heated. It's just, I've never seen it otherwise. Things get heated in these online conversations. There's almost no way to avoid it. But to the extent that I contributed to unnecessary chaos, I do apologize, and I do apologize for bringing that to your channel. But I also thank you very much for allowing me to bring my perspective. That is to be commended. Anyways, I want to go back to this conversation. So this is what Christians are being taught, which is that God sent his son, who is God. God looked down. Humanity has a sin problem, and this problem needs to be solved because God really doesn't like sin. And in the Calvinist system, that's a huge problem because God ordained the sin. So God could have easily avoided the problem by not ordaining sin. Because even the Calvinists will say, like, God could have ordained any possible universe, and it's easily, it's possible that within this framework that God could have just not ordained sin. God could have just ordained that all people not sin, and that would have solved the problem. But for some reason, God decided to ordain that basically everyone would not only sin, but be a sinner. So God created this problem where he made everyone a sinner. And now God's got to solve the problem that he created. So what he's going to do is, instead of, asking people not to sin or getting people to turn from their sins, no. It's not about stopping sinning or continuing in sin. It's none of that. God's got a solution. He's going to send his son down, and he's going to get his son killed on the cross. He's going to have his son executed by a bunch of sinful human beings on a cross. And when they kill him, God's going to impute all the sins of mankind on his son, and judge his son as being the kind of the encapsulation of all the sin has ever occurred. And he's going to declare mankind righteous for killing his son. And then he's going to impute his son's righteousness to all of mankind, who will then still be allowed to continue sinning and killing and murdering and cheating and lying, stealing, doing other things. And that's the solution that God came up with. Now, it's not presented in those terms, but that's essentially what's being told. But the catch is this. Jesus dying on the cross doesn't pay for your sins unless you believe it does, unless you trust in him to be the savior that did that for you. Okay. So once you believe that Jesus died for your sins,
and basically paid the penalty for the sins that you did, then you're declared righteous. But if you think that you have to obey God and actually stop sinning, then God's going to send you to hell because you're not trusting in Jesus Christ as your savior. This is the message that's being taught. If you think that you have to obey God's law, that's what sends you to hell. You know, if you think you have to be righteous, then you're not trusting in God's promises. Well, you have to reject the idea that you need to be righteous. Because if you think you have to be righteous, that means you don't think that your righteousness comes from Christ, which means you don't trust in Christ. So you have to reject the idea that you must repent of sin and become right. And this is why Christianity is so dangerous. And when I say Christianity, I obviously mean this particular conceptualization of Christianity. Because you have to reject the idea that you must be righteous, even though that's the whole point of Christ coming to earth was to teach people that they must be righteous. Because in Matthew 5:20, or maybe it's 19, Matthew 5:19, Matthew 5:20, Jesus says, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall in no case enter the kingdom of heaven. So it doesn't say you shall in no case enter the kingdom of heaven unless you believe that I died for your sins. No, it says, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, then you shall in no case enter the kingdom of heaven. As if eternal salvation would be dependent on whether you're convinced of something. Right. This is so what Christianity has become boiled down to is essentially an affirmation of certain propositions. For some Christians, it's affirming the Trinity. For some Christians, you know, it doesn't go necessarily that far, but it entails believing that Jesus Christ died for your sins. And if you, whatever the propositions are, that as long as you affirm them and trust in them, then you know, basically you've believed the right doctrine, and that's what makes you a righteous person. When very well you can believe in the Trinity, you can believe Jesus is God on earth, and still be a horrible person who doesn't treat people very well and causes all kinds of problems and you know violates other people in any manner of ways. But the point of Christianity is, according to them, is, well, Jesus is paying for all those failings and transgressions. So as long as you believe in him, you know, you should do the right thing. So Christianity, this type of Christianity needs to be defeated. It needs to be overthrown because it's ultimately because it's untrue, I believe. But also there are a lot of things that aren't true that people believe, which aren't dangerous. But this Christianity is actually dangerous. It's actually a thing that's dangerous for the world. It's dangerous for society because it's about convincing you that your being righteous is not necessary. It does kind of echo the messianic secret in Mark, though, so I can see where that concept spawned from. Not at all what Jesus meant, though. Yeah, Jesus did say some things that make it seem like you have to believe some proposition to be saved. There's a couple of issues with this, though. One problem I have with the idea of needing to believe some fact that was given within history creates a situation where God isn't judging people fairly. Because let's say that Jesus comes along and it's the year it's 0 AD or 33 AD or whatever it is. Well, there are a lot of people who lived before that. And let's say one of the conditions of salvation is you have to believe Jesus is the Messiah. Well, let's just say it's whatever the Messiah is. He's just the Messiah. It doesn't even necessarily mean he's God or anything like that. The problem with that is that creates a situation where the people who were born before Jesus are either all going to hell because they can't believe that, or they're exempt from that belief because they couldn't have believed something that just wasn't within their frame of reference. And well, which creates this other problem where the people who came after Jesus have this extra burden of believing another fact that isn't necessary for people who came
before them. So they have to believe there's one more thing that they have to do for salvation that isn't required of all the people who came before them. So it makes salvation just, even if it just makes it just a little bit harder, it's still an unfair system. It's an unjust system. So I really am hesitant to accept any theological framework that says you have to believe something to be saved, because that's going to be contingent upon your basically the time and place in which you live. Whereas if the framework is an eternal system of laws that operates equally, moral laws which operates equally throughout time and space, which is my system, all people are being judged equally. So in John 8:24, Jesus says, "Unless you believe that I am He, you will die in your sins." So there's that, but that's obviously the Gospel of John. So right there is we're starting to ask questions. But there could be a situation where if you're directly presented with facts and you're denying it because even though it's right in your face, that would be the only situation where you're not denying it because it's basically this eternal requirement for all people, but rather because it's something within you that is preventing you from seeing the truth. So it's not really that you're denying, it's not really that you don't believe the right thing, it's that your heart isn't in the right place to believe the truth even when it's presented to you directly. So that's one way to kind of look at that. But yeah, that's an interesting point. So it's not like statements of this type aren't being made, but the question is, how do we, is that necessarily the takeaway? But yeah, so it's amazing. I try to get people, I've been trying for years now to get people to, and I've had conversations with, I don't know how many countless Christians in various panels. And when I first started this, I can't believe this, but I was expecting there to be some people who would be like, you know what? Yeah, that kind of makes sense. But to this day, almost no one, or maybe a couple of people who I haven't talked to, but almost no one has been willing to change their mind and accept the source of the problem that I'm seeing in Christianity, which is that people aren't even paying attention to Jesus Christ. Most of them are paying attention to Paul and his epistles. And I think that's the source of the problem. And as many times as I pointed this out, I'm really shocked at how few people have been willing to engage with this idea, even engage with it. Usually I get, just dismissed immediately. The second I start bringing up those kinds of questions, then that's when I'll get blocked or whatever, or kicked from the room or put aside. And if there's multiple people in the room, they'll continue to have the discussion about Christian doctrine from within the framework of this very rigid, traditionalist, narrow framework of the Bible is inerrant. There's 66 books. The book is all inspired. All of it needs to be there and interpreted. Question. I can't help but wonder what convinced you that Yahweh exists. I've heard decent arguments for a generic creator God, but Yahweh seems as mythological as Zeus or Enlil to me. What am I missing? Not trying. No, that's Andy. That's exactly why I started this discussion, to answer questions like this. If you look at the discussion topics, you're actually doing exactly what I want, which is one of them is theism versus non-theism. Really, when I start these streams, I really just kind of blabber until someone starts to engage with a certain idea, and I try to go from there. So now that you've done that, we can kind of, begin a conversation that involves engaging with someone who's part of the audience. What convinces you that Yahweh exists? Well, this is a really first of all, what does Yahweh mean? Yahweh, it depending on your perspective. Now, you'll probably disagree with this. Now, I've heard
atheists claim that Yahweh is the name of one of the local deities of, and I think maybe even you have made this argument, and I'm not sure. I'm willing to see the evidence, but basically, the proto Hebraic Jewish people basically inherited the term Yahweh from one of the previous Canaanite deities of that region, and it became the main deity of Judaism. I'm not convinced that that's correct. Now, if evidence was brought to me that that's what happened, and maybe it's out there, I'm not saying it's not out there, then I would seriously be willing to consider it and look at it. But to me, based on my understanding, is that Yahweh is actually comes from a phrase that comes from Hebrew. So basically, Hebrew, however ancient that there's Paleo Hebrew, there's Hebrew that goes with. But at the end of the day, what Yahweh means is "I am that I am," and that's even in Exodus 3:14. So basically, the name of God it's not really a name, but a description of the nature and quality and character of God, which is that it's "I am that I am." So it's not really like a name like John or Bob or Zeus or Thor. It's basically a statement about what God is, which is, it's kind of like saying God is the eternally self-existent being. Some scholars have actually said Yahweh could be translated that way. Something along the lines of the eternally self-existent being. I am that I am. I am because I am. I exist. I exist because I exist. I exist eternally because it's the concept of the quality of God called aseity. Okay, so the name of God in Hebrew is actually a description of what God is. It is the eternally self-existent being. So God is the foundational principle of all of reality. So it's not like Yahweh isn't like one of many gods. Like, I mean, there are false gods that people believe in, and the Bible talks about them. But what the Bible is presenting, even in the Old Testament, is that Yahweh is this self-existent being that is the source of all creation. And any other concept of God that is basically like a man floating around the sky is basically an anthropomorphized, personalized God that doesn't really exist. Okay. So it's not like I believe in the Jewish deity that was compared to Zeus or Thor or Azura Mazda or whatever. And I was like, I like Yahweh more than I like Zeus and Osiris and all the others and Dionysus. So I'm going to choose Yahweh. No, it's the idea that this God, this self-existent God, communicated through these prophets. And it doesn't mean he's not the God of all these other people groups, but he is the God of the entire universe, speaking through a particular people. So what is the evidence of God? Well, to me, there's countless reasons to believe that a God of this nature might exist. I think there's philosophical arguments, there's scientific arguments, there's anecdotal or personal experience arguments. Just the fact, I've made the case on atheist call-in shows that just the fact that like reality or the universe itself is evidence of God. So when you say Yahweh, you really, it's necessary to remind ourselves that when we're talking about Yahweh, we really are just talking about the idea of a general creator God that is the God of all things. That is, according to our language, Yahweh. Let me try to make sure. Let me just catch up here. We can just replace Yahweh with the God. Well, it's the God of Israel, but it's the God of everything. Okay. I was about to listen to myself, but I came in order to listen to you. Yeah. Reverend 2. I have heard I am what will be quite a lot from. Yeah, I mean, there's different ways of translating the exact grammar, but I think the concept that's being communicated is that God is a self-existent being. And so what are basically, before you get to the linguistics of why we should call God Yahweh, or why God would be named Yahweh according to the Bible. Let's just try to establish that some intelligent creator exists. So when we say the word God, we have to define it, because we can define God in any number of different ways. And I think that, and this is, by the way, this is the question that I'm responding to for the audience. Well, he wasn't the god of other nations, for instance. Shamash was the god of Moab, Haman of Ammon, Milcom of Phoenicia. Right. You're exactly right. But only because that's the misconception of those people groups. Because of the limitations of their human mind, they created these kind of deities that were at work in nature or parts of nature, or kind of like spirit humans that would lived in the sky and kind of, fought again, kind of blessed them or cursed them. And I'm not saying God doesn't do those things, but what I'm trying to say is they had their minds, and their disconnection from God created like smaller local deities that were the gods of these local people groups. That doesn't mean that there wasn't a real God who is the creator of the entire universe, who is the God of everyone. So they can create gods and give them all these different names all they want. Of course, people are going to do that, and people can still do that to this day, and they still do, and they still make up all kinds of false religious concepts. Like even in the year 600, or about the year 600, whenever Muhammad lived, he basically changed Yahweh into Allah, but Allah was the moon god from that local people group. So these people still do this, and they still borrow the concept of Yahweh and make new religions. Like, take for instance, not to be offensive to Mormons, but that's what Joseph Smith did. He borrowed the entire concept of Judaism and Christianity and created basically an entirely new religion with a fundamentally different concept of God and Jesus than anything that had come before him. That doesn't mean that there wasn't a real Jesus or a real religion that existed before him, which was based in truth. But the point is, people make things up all the time, and they get things wrong all the time. And they can do that. It doesn't change the fact that beyond their concept of what God is, their false concept, that there is actually a real God. They created deities with stories about their gods. So why is the God of the Bible different? Well, the God of the Bible starts off by presenting God as kind of a universal creator. It's not just like this local deity that kind of interacts with a small group of people in a small place for a small time. The Bible starts off with the idea that God is the creator of the entire universe. Okay, so that is a proper concept of what God is, because what is God? God is the source of reality. So right there, the God of the Bible is the source of all we know and all we don't know. Okay, and this Yahweh. Remember, Yahweh means eternally self-existent being. It's not like a name of a deity that is kind of almost like akin to a human name. Like humans have names: Richard, Bob, Michael, whatever it may be. Yahweh isn't actually like a name like that. It's a description of God's character. I am that I am. All right. But it became a name. It became what God was called. Okay. So that's what the confusion arises. But what this term meant is when Moses asked, what should I call you? God said, this is what I want you to call me. I am that I am. I am the eternally self-existent being. I existed throughout all eternity, and I'm going to exist throughout all eternity. Okay? And this goes, like I was saying earlier, this goes to one of the most important concepts in theology, which is the idea of the aseity of God, the non-contingency of God. God is a non-contingent being, whereas all things in reality are predicated upon cause and effect. God is the uncaused cause. This is the philosopher God that is relating to us through human prophets. Okay? So in human ignorance, we do create deities of all kinds throughout history. But all the time, I can just see God sitting up there and being like, "No, that's a God you all made." Because Andy, when you think about it, before you start questioning a specific religion's concept of God, if you get to the point where you say, "Is there what is God? What would a God be?" Okay, what would a God be? Well, I think that there are two things that any properly defined God should be. It should be the source of creation, the source of reality, or the foundation of reality, however you want to say that. And it should be something that's intelligent, which means it has a mind, it has awareness, it's intentional. It's not just some naturalistic field of quantum particles, that have no sense of awareness or consciousness or intention. So we have to get ourselves, when you get yourself to a point where you believe such a God could plausibly exist, then the next step is, could this God communicate through human prophets? And then once you accept that, which I think should be very easy to accept, the idea of the Old Testament prophets becomes, makes a whole lot of sense. And it's not like these people are creating a God it's basically it is how this mechanism by which God is interacting with humanity. Okay, which is human prophets. The only question that remains at that point is, why wouldn't God do it another way? Why wouldn't he just appear in the sky in this, blinding light and speak to everyone individually? And I know we've discussed this many times on this channel and the reasons why God might do it that way. I've given my reasons. But the point is, one of the mechanisms that God has used is human prophets. Now, you can argue, well, there's a lot of different better ways that God could go about convincing us that he exists. You might be right, but there might also be good reasons why God doesn't do it that way. The point is, that doesn't negate the fact that one, God is a plausible concept that exists in reality. Two, God can interact with humanity. And three, one of the mechanisms God has chosen to use is human prophets. I don't see any of those propositions as being outside the realm of rational thought, unless I'm missing something. All right, let's try to catch up on comments here. Not just that, but they were involved in heinous acts of religion, which is what offended God. Hence, objective excess is a huge necessary aspect. These are way back. This is where the conversation needs to reside, the root. I think the exact same thing about the Judaites. They borrowed the concept of Yahweh from earlier gods and adapted it to their own culture. Well, let's say that's true. Does that make the concept of Yahweh false necessarily? Even if you want to say, well, let's say the Mormons did that. Let's say they studied this religion from 2,000 years ago, and they kind of borrowed some concepts from it, and they changed some things, but that doesn't change the reality that there was a pre-existent truth there. Okay, so let's say the Jews did the same thing. For some reason, they looked at these other cultures and saw that there was this God speaking to people, and they took. Now, I don't think that you could argue that these texts are just made up and they just fabricated these things. But the point is, if they're borrowing from other sources, there's a pre-existent truth there that isn't being fabricated. There's some kernel or seed of truth. And I don't think there's proof, and I might be wrong about this, but I don't think there's proof that the idea of Yahweh is itself something that can be traced to another religion. Okay? Now, I know there's Akhenaten, who was a monotheist in Egypt, who came before Moses, supposedly. I'm not familiar with all of the timelines. So monotheism did exist perhaps before Moses or Abraham or these patriarchal figures. Okay, but to me, I think the most sense about how the origin of Yahweh is that it does seem to be stemmed from the Hebrew language, the Yodhi Vodhi, the idea of grammatically that God is just an eternally self-existent being. I don't think it's like a name. Like, let's say Osiris, or let's take Osiris for example, or Dionysus. Okay, if your theory were to be true, let's take. I'm trying to think of a god that I know existed before Yahweh. I can't. Let's just say I don't know, but let's say Osiris. Now, if your theory was true, Andy, I don't think Yahweh would be Yahweh. I think it'd be like Osiris, and then you would see more of like a lineage from Egypt to the Judaites. Okay, but Yahweh I don't see as being derived from a pre-existent deity. It's derived from a grammatical construct of the Hebrew language. It's not like the Jews really liked Greek pantheon and they saw Zeus and they created a god named Zos, where there's some sort of linguistic connection to the previous god that they borrowed and adapted. No, it's like the name of God in Judaism is a description of God in that language. So it's not like they're taking one God, taking the name, taking the idea, and just reshaping it for their own culture. I don't think that's what's happening. Now, there are aspects of the narrative of the Old Testament that could very well be argued were borrowed from other, religious, cultural narratives in that place and time. There's no question. I mean, obviously the idea of Noah and all that has been brought under scrutiny from the Epic of Gilgamesh and things like that. So it's not like there aren't reasons to think that maybe some elements of the Old Testament narrative as a whole could have been, co-opted from other cultures. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying there seems to be this discussion going on. But what I am saying is that I don't see that same parallel between the very idea of the Jewish God being directly borrowed from previous cultures and the way it's kind of brought about in the Old Testament. If they borrowed pagan gods, they took all the random barbarism because that's a clear qualitative difference in the pagan stories from the biblical history. God is a mind. Yeah, God either is a mind or has a mind. I think you're viewing Yahweh through a modern lens as opposed to seeing him how 10th century BC Canaanites saw him. He was a local god among dozens of other local gods. Well, that's a claim, but I don't think that's taking the text at face value. I think that that is what your average anthropologist would like us to believe, but that's discounting the possibility and that's not what's being presented by the text. Now, the question is, should we take the text seriously? Because obviously, if they're falsifying this religion, they're going to want to present their God as being rooted in reality and not just another God among many who's fighting superiority. So you could make that argument, but if we take the text at face value, what we're seeing is a transcendent universal God speaking through a localized people group. He was a God that was universal who chose the Jewish people, the Abrahamic people, whatever you want to call them, because of whatever reasons he saw to do so. It's not like he wasn't the God of the Egyptians and the Amalekites and the Chinese people and all the others. It's just that he had a special relationship with the Abrahamic descendants. And I would like to believe that it's because they merited such a relationship and not just because God was playing favorites. Okay? They did that in contradiction to Leviticus, and the prophets came to correct them.
Absolutely, because the earlier gods that they borrowed Yahweh's attributes from were clear personifications of famine, death, storms, fertility. Huh. I think there's a serious qualitative difference between the kind of pantheon, polyistic theological systems of the people of that time and what became the Abrahamic concept of God. All of the gods, if you look at the Egyptian gods or the Greek gods or the Babylonian gods, you're right. They were personifications of forces in nature, and they were temperamental, and they were human in their activities. I really don't think they are presented as totally transcendent of humanity. Even there's actually even evidence that when you go back far enough, a lot of there was a belief in Greek and Egypt that all of the gods that they worshipped had existed as real humans before them, including Zeus and people like Hermes or gods like Hermes and Apollo. They're actually, if you, this is surprising to most people. It's not like they just lived in this cloud kingdom and just for all eternity and looked down on Earth. These were actually human beings who ascended to become gods on Mount Olympus. That's just not what we're seeing from the Judaic concept of God. God is presented as eternally transcendent and beyond these kind of localized ideas of what gods of gods that what gods were and how they operated with humanity. They didn't borrow those attributes because he's described as making everything to live and not making death, which precludes those disasters. There's no good reason to conclude that the early gods actually existed. Their stories are insanely fantastic and obviously reflect 3rd millennium BC Mesopotamian life and not divinity. I agree. Maybe I'm falling too far back on comments. You're getting hung up with the word Yahweh. It's just a title to refer to the God of Israel. I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that's true, Andy. I'm not saying you're definitely wrong, but again, taking the text at face value, and I know that some scholars are trying to say that the entire Torah, or at least a lot of it, was written only a few hundred years, the farthest they want to go back is the exile period in Babylon, which I think is like the 500s, 600s BC. I think there are at least most of it goes back farther than that. And even when you look at the fact that it's so ancient, it's amazing how it really is not a title. It's not just like a name that is given to a local deity. It is a description of the nature and character of God. It literally is the tetragrammaton. It comes from Yod He Vod He. It's not a name. It's a principle of the character and quality of God. Yahweh's attributes weren't borrowed from Egyptian mythology. He's very Canaanite. No, I disagree. The Mesopotamian and Canaanite gods were every bit, I would say, inferior to the Egyptian and Greek gods. They were local deities who were the gods of those particular people at that particular time, and they weren't transcendent. I mean, they might have existed in some, imperceptible world beyond humanity's ability to perceive directly, but they weren't. When you talk about the Canaanites and Mesopotamians, they were dealing with kind of these polytheistic schemes where, there's like a god for the wind and a god for the sun and a god for the crops and a god that causes the plagues and diseases and all these different things. There's not one unified idea of an eternally existent God that is the source of everything and the creator of the principle of everything that exists. Yahweh is incredibly unique among the these cultures, these ancient cultures. It is a very unique concept of God that is almost absent everywhere, amazingly absent in many other places. Now, you see individual voices talking about these kinds of things, but as a general culturally accepted concept, like you hear some of the Greek philosophers individually talking about one God, like Plato and Socrates and a number of others, and Pythagoras, and I'm sure there were similar other voices in Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Near East, and elsewhere, China, perhaps elsewhere. But the Jews, if may use that term, were the only people group who had the concept of God they had. They were incredibly unique. He interacts with other gods in the Bible. He talks about how the other gods are false. Nathaniel, it was really nice having you on the show today. You did a great job defending your views. Yeah, it was good to talk to Nathaniel. It was good to talk to everyone on that panel. It seems like a big Humphrey was realizing just how clear the evidence is that Yahweh is an evolution of these earlier gods. Yahweh is a continuation of Mesopotamian storm god Iskor, which later became identified as Hadad, then Teshub, then Zeus, then Indra, then Yahweh. He follows a very specific narrative pattern that all these stories engage with. I mean, here's the thing, Andy. I've been studying this topic. Now, I'm not saying I know everything. And I'm not denying the possibility that you're correct. But I really think that this concept is rooted more in almost like 2000s internet, like Reddit religious discussions and videos, like Zeitgeist and things like that. Like, I really think that this is not rooted in solid scholarship, but rather scholars looking at these previous deities and saying, hey, look, well, first of all, these cultures have a god or gods, and they came before the Abrahamic faith did. That must necessarily mean it's a borrowed concept right there. So just the fact that these cultures existed in time before before Judaism, I don't know what to call it. I'm just going to call it early Judaism. If there is a true God, and let's just take the idea of Abraham seriously. Let's say Abraham was a real person. I know you don't do that, but let's say Abraham existed. What's the traditional year time frame? Like 1500 BC or so, something around there. Okay, there are cultures that existed before him that had, gods or gods. I would say all of them were polytheistic. Well, you're saying if God communicates to Abraham, how is he supposed to make it look like? How is he supposed to prove that Abraham isn't just looking around at all these other gods, borrowing concepts from them and just making things up on the spot? It's impossible. So just the fact that these other deities exist doesn't negate the fact that there is a God who is transcendent and universal and is actually speaking through these people and has perhaps some characteristics like these local deities. All these local gods are going to have some qualities that are like superhuman. They're all going to have something to do with the operation of the universe and nature and things like that. There's no avoiding that. But again, trying to trace the development of a specific presentation of God, the first thing, I think it's dangerous because you do fall into that hole of, well, there were all these gods, and Abraham came along and he just borrowed, whoever the people who made up Abraham, I guess in your case, they just looked around, they created this guy named Abraham, they made up all these stories, and they borrowed all these concepts of God. Okay, that's a theory. It's not proven. Okay, it's not even close to proven. Another theory is that this actually just kind of happened just like it said. There was a guy named Abraham or whoever, whatever his name was, and God spoke to him, and people wrote it down, and it got transmitted to today, whether perfectly or imperfectly. So what's the proof that Yahweh is an evolution as opposed to a real revelation from a real God? Correct. Yahweh in Hebrew only meant pagan. It's from Yahweh versus Jehovah. Jehovah only, no. Mike. Technically, it stands, but it's used to refer to a specific deity. Also, I used to differentiate him from other gods. It's the term. All right, Andy. Let me put it to you this way. Yes, it did become a name. It became the name of God, but properly understood, it's a title. It's a name given to God, to humanity, by God Himself about who God is, and the Yahweh is just the linguistic structure in the Hebrew language of what God wanted them. Let's say there's the Jews on one side of the earth and the Native Americans on the other side of the earth. Okay, they're going to have different languages, right? Think about it this way. So in the Hebrew language, I am that I am is Yod, Yod He Vod He. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but that's probably pretty close to how it's pronounced. Okay, well let's say Spanish was a language back then. There were Spanish people on the other side of, in some other culture. If God was to communicate with those Spanish people, I am that I am would be yo soy que yo soy. So YS. So the name of God to the Spanish people would be Yos Yos. So now you have two gods, two local deities. No, you have God communicating to two different people, and within their language structure, giving them a name that they then misinterpret as a name, and it becomes their local deity. But God has to operate through human prophets who have a language, so it appears to be a local deity, but it's really just the limitations of human language making it appear like this universal God is a local deity. May I come up? Absolutely. Let me post a link. All right, that link is for Andy if he wants to come up. So, Andy, if you want to click the link and try to have this conversation in a little easier way, that's absolutely yeah. Just I don't know if you're able to see the link. In the meantime, however, everyone, he's talking to Jethro and Midian. I pause as Moses waits for an okay. Andy has joined us. All right, Andy, how's it going?
What's up, Anthony? How you been?
I've been good. It's good to talk to you again on the panel. It's been a while.
I know I've been busy. I've actually been struggling with learning Hebrew over the past few months.
Okay. Wow. Impressive. I mean, that you're even trying. Yeah, I heard it's really hard to learn.
Yeah, it's way more technical than you realize. Hearing people talk about Hebrew and then actually going and learning the rules, it's quite extensive. There's a lot you have to remember while you're parsing your way through a Hebrew word.
Yeah, I couldn't even begin. I haven't done that study myself, so I can't know the specifics, but this is something I've heard is that Hebrew is a particularly difficult language to learn. So, but I guess you're learning it so you have a better idea of what's actually being written in the Old Testament to better understand whether it's valid or not, or what's your motivation?
Exactly.
Okay, that's good. You know, you're doing more than I did, so I respect that. Um, so I guess where do you want to start? Like, what is it that you want to say based on everything that's already been said, or how do you want to go forward from here?
Well, like I was saying, I think that the root of this Jesus or Muhammad or Yahweh conversation goes back to Yahweh himself. And when I say Yahweh, I guess we can just replace the term Yahweh with any other word or term or title. I'm just specifically referring to the God that speaks in the Bible. Um, I think that all of these stories rely on the existence of Yahweh, as opposed to, you know, people making up stories about Yahweh like everybody else did. And the similarities, not only in Yahweh's attributes, but also in the narratival structure of the storyline, is it it mimics a really common pattern across the ancient Near East that spread out from Mesopotamia all the way to Greece, all the way down into Egypt, all the way east into India, obviously all over Canaan, and it was adopted left and right and changed and altered in slightly different ways as it moved from one group to the other. And Yahweh fits squarely into this tradition. He mimics all of these same features that this God had, and how the story began. And like I was saying, the Mesopotamian gods were personifications of natural forces like famine or death or abundance or fertility or whatever. And the Mesopotamian storm god, the Mesopotamian pantheon, by the way, is the oldest pantheon that we have writing describing, with gods interacting with other gods or with people, or just showing people worshiping gods even. And Hadad is one of the earliest, or I'm sorry, Ishkur is one of the earliest gods that pops up in the Mesopotamian pantheon in Sumeria, and he's the son of the highest god in Lil. Well, Anu actually is the highest god, so he would be the son of Anu. And Ishkur is the god of storms, and he's always associated with some sort of lightning weaponry, like a weapon made out of lightning. Like sometimes it's an axe, sometimes it's a mace, sometimes it's a bow and arrow. Sometimes it's a spear that he throws, but he's always associated with some sort of lightning weaponry. He's always called the rider on the clouds, and is depicted in artwork as riding on clouds as well. And he is associated with a bull, which is the bull of heaven in Mesopotamian mythology, and it's sort of like paired with him. Sometimes it's seen as his like spouse, like his wife. Sometimes it's seen as like the second half of like his powers or whatever. Like he needs the bull of heaven to have his storm abilities. But Ishkur is the god of storms, and the highest god would summon Ishkur to cause storms and blah blah blah. And a storm god was a really popular type of god for anyone to have in the ancient Near East in any time period, because when you live in the Fertile Crescent, you're subject to constant droughts and floods and droughts and floods and crops getting destroyed and extreme abundance. And so being on the right side of a storm deity's temper is in your best interests. So like the storm god, regardless of who the storm god was and regardless of what time period, was often the chief deity of a nation or of a city because they're the most important of all the deities. If you're on the right side of the storms, you're going to survive. Anyway, so the Canaanites had their own storm god too, you know, west of Mesopotamia over by the Mediterranean. They had their own storm god. And as the Canaanites mixed with the Sumerians, or I guess it would probably be more like the Amorites mixing with the Sumerians or whatever, but as those two cultures mixed, because there were constant trade routes between the two, they fused those two storm gods. The storm god of the Canaanites was called Adad, and Ishkur obviously was the storm god in Mesopotamia. They fused these two gods, syncretized them, openly wrote in several different Mesopotamian clay tablets that they are the same god, even gave them a hyphenated name where they were called Ishkur Adad. And then anyway, this concept spread out into Anatolia, and the Hittites and the Hurrians picked it up, and they copied like key elements to that whole, you know, lightning weaponry, born of the highest god, storm god, associated with bulls, that whole thing, rising above and taking the highest seat of power of the high god, that's his father. All of those attributes exist. They exist in Adad, they exist in Ishkur, they exist in Teshub, they exist in Zeus, they exist in Yahweh. It's a repeated pattern that, and not only that, but like the spread of these stories, you know, going from Mesopotamia to the Hittites to the Canaanites to the Greeks, it all lines up as well with the timeline. Like the farther away it is, the later it was picked up and changed as well. And so, yeah, Yahweh falls very squarely into that pattern. And he comes from a time period where every nation had a god, and there were hundreds and hundreds of different gods across Canaan, you know, with massive temples and thousands of people worshiping, people killing themselves for gods. I mean, the worship was very serious for all of these gods. And so I think it's easy to see the stories about Yahweh and to separate him from these other gods when you haven't read this, like the stories or the writings about the other gods and the way that people talk about the gods. The gods in the other stories do have creation stories where they create humans. They do have prophecy stories where they communicate through oracles. They interact with humans, they interact with other gods, everything that there's nothing unique about Yahweh, except for that people later viewed Yahweh as the only God. That's the only thing different about Yahweh from other gods, is that eventually, not originally, but eventually he was viewed as the only God. I'm sorry for ranting for so long.
No, that's fine. And these are things. Some of this now, the specifics of it, you might be aware of a lot more of the details of these things. Now, these are this. Now, I'm not. I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound critical, but it's not. I'm just saying is the fact. These sound like the kinds of things that are popular, topics of discussion on channels like MythVision.
Mhm.
And again, that's not a criticism, because the things that are on MythVision could very well be true.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is I've heard these kinds. There's a reason that these kinds of arguments, to me, aren't sufficient to refute Yahweh as a valid concept of God, or I don't see them as proving that Yahweh is a purely fantastical mythological concept of God, for this reason. And the reason is basically that if you have a situation where in early human culture, they
all around the world, people were creating and, if you want to say that, their concepts of God in this sort of almost like Superman kind of thing, where God is like this super powerful guy who's like up there looking down on people and blessing them or punishing them, or usually it's a group of gods doing this, like the Greek pantheon and the 12 of Mount Olympus and things like that. So this is very common. My question is, if a real God existed and he really did, speak to people in the ancient world, how would it be possible for God to basically clear the smoke and prove that this isn't something that these prophets are just making up and borrowing from other cultures? This is the problem I have, because if God was doing this, then the fact that all these other gods, sure, they're out there, but that doesn't negate the idea that one of these cultures could be teaching a true concept. So you have to prove this is the problem. I'll finish here. You actually have to prove that this is an evolution of thought, as opposed to a reality that enters into a situation where all these other ideas already exist. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, I think so. When we look at ancient texts like this, nothing is ever going to be known with 100% certainty. That's just an unfortunate reality of historical studies. And so we're left with the option of, or we're left with the decision of which is more likely. Is it more likely that this God was real and that he actually interacted through these prophets and it was just recorded as it was said? Or is it more likely that they're engaging with this tradition that everybody around them was engaging with and we have proof of? And to me, the more likely answer is that it was engaging with these older traditions.
Okay, well, I can't fault you for that. I mean, that's certainly very plausible. I'll give you that. I guess one question I would have for you is, when it comes to the Jewish people, the scholars today are trying to make it seem like, what became the Judaism of Jesus Christ Day has its roots in the exile period in Babylon, and before that, basically, it's a very different scene.
That's 100. That's accurate.
Okay, so if that's accurate, then what you have to believe is the actual psychological foundations of what became Judeo-Christianity. Its real roots can only be traced back to about 400 to maybe 500 BC, right?
Sort of. Well, like Isaiah and Amos and Hosea, for instance, they were assumingly real people. I have no reason to doubt that, and they predate the Babylonian exile by like more than 100 years.
Right. And so wouldn't you agree that, so do you think, I know that scholars dispute that Isaiah was all written at once by one person. There's multiple layers to Isaiah. I've heard all.
Definitely. It definitely wasn't.
So you're saying Isaiah was not all written at one place by one person? Is that your
No,
opinion?
you can, and just even with my very limited, because I bought what's called the Biblia Hebraica Stuttergentia, and it's an all Hebrew Old Testament that is used for practice for learning Hebrew. And so I've been reading Isaiah because it's my favorite book, and just poking around trying to fit words together in Hebrew. And after chapter 39 is when it switches from the first author to the second author. And if you are reading through the first part of Isaiah, the first 39 chapters of Isaiah in Hebrew, and then you get to that 40th chapter, the grammar and syntax switch slaps you in the face like a ton of bricks. It's very obvious.
Oh, so yeah, this is why scholars say there's a first Isaiah, a second Isaiah, and a third Isaiah, right? There's actually a third break at some
Yeah,
point. Is that what you
right.
believe? Oh,
After the
okay,
last 11 chapters are the third author.
okay. So let's just take the original 39 chapters, and I do think scholars do think that that could likely be traced back to an actual Isaiah. All right, are you willing to go that far?
Oh, yeah, I 100% believe that Isaiah was a real person, or that these stories were at least written during the time of the Assyrian invasion for real.
Okay. So, I'm not someone who's memorized the entire Old Testament, but Isaiah was, if I'm not mistaken, he was right before the exile period, right? He was talking about the upcoming exile, correct?
He was about 140 years before the Babylonian exile.
Right. And he's talking about when he's condemning, the behavior of the Jews, the Israelites, whatever you want to call them.
Mhm.
He's talking about a culture that has apparently existed for hundreds of years. He's talking about the forefathers and the things that happened of old and things
Yep.
like that. So I don't
Yeah.
understand how. So he's talking about this. I really have a hard time accepting these scholars who are saying the roots of Judaism are in the exile period. We have, even if you just want to accept first Isaiah chapters 1 through 39, 100 years before the exile, talking about a centuries old culture that
Mhm.
believed in these things. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty vague what he says about the past, to be fair. He doesn't really talk about it in the way that Genesis and Exodus does, but he does definitely hint back at some much older past. And I wouldn't doubt that anyway. We have inscriptions that predate Isaiah by more than 100 years that talk about Yahweh. So we know that Yahweh was floating around for sure more than 100 years before Isaiah. 120 years before Isaiah, we have two different inscriptions talking about Yahweh, and they're like 100 miles apart from each other in Canaan.
Yeah. So when it comes, so to me, when I hear scholars talking about this, and this is what I'm getting to, you have these scholars trying to make it seem like Judaism was almost. Now they are willing to admit there are earlier fragments of Old Testament Torah material in inscriptions and things like that.
Mhm.
But what they're trying to say is all these concepts about Yahweh and the grander idea of the Torah and this worship of this deity called, they're basically saying it's a product of the exile period and trying to unify a culture, when I think that there's clear proof, or if I'm not wrong, that these this culture had existed for at least several centuries before that, which is certainly enough time for there to be a reality to the patriarchs and things like that. So
Yeah.
that's what.
Well, there's a big shift between the evidence for the patriarch period and onward, and the patriarch period, or I'm sorry, the judges period and prior. The judges period and prior, there is no inscriptional evidence or anything for any characters in the Bronze Age part of the Bible. And when you get into the Iron Age around the time of King David or after that, tons. And it increasingly as time goes by. And that's inconsistent with, excavations from Egypt and from Mesopotamia and from Canaan. To just have nothing like that for, 1,000 years straight it's not even possible. So it definitely doesn't go back as far as Exodus and Genesis are talking. All the evidence shows that the Israelites popped up sometime around 1100, right after the Bronze Age collapse. That's when Proto-Hebrew popped up. That's when people from up in Lebanon started moving down into the hill country and making settlements in Canaan. And there was a huge political shift across the entire Mediterranean. Egypt lost power of Canaan. So it seems to be like that everything popped up slowly around 1100 BCE. And then, yeah, King David was probably real right around 1,000, 100 years later. They slowly built up to a king. And sure, he had a son, Solomon. There's no reason to doubt any of these just normal historical parts of the story. But when you go back before the time of King David, It does not. It's not congruent with what we know about the ancient Near East at all. And not only does it repeatedly contradict itself, but it contradicts what we know from archaeology and from other writings.
Well, here's the problem. It's like you said earlier. When we're talking about things that happened. So you're talking about 1100 BC. So
Mhm.
that's 3,000 years ago. At that point, the record is just simply going to be lost, and you know,
That's the mentality that needs to die, though, because that's just not true. We have such a rich record of that time period for all the other cultures. Tons. We have thousands of tablets from Ugarit, from one city in Canaan. We have thousands of tablets.
yeah, but you realize like there are still like tombs of pharaohs that haven't been found yet. Like
Oh yeah,
these you know what I mean, they found the tomb of
yeah.
King Tut like 100 years ago.
We
There's
don't even have 5% of what was lost. I agree with that. But we should still have evidence. You know what I mean? There should still be these people. We're talking about 1,000 years of people worshiping this God Yahweh in Canaan, and we have no evidence for it at all. No one talking about him, no inscriptions of him, no artwork about him, nothing. No theophoric names, nothing.
well, you know, again, that could be explained by the religion itself. God said, "You shall make no graven images," so they're not going to be making inscriptions
Right, but
about these.
they were though, according to the Bible, through the whole Bible, they were though.
Uh, were they? I mean, they were, but these were people who you would admit are being disobedient, right?
Yeah, but that's the point, though. They, right from the beginning of time, they were disobedient all the way back to, all the way back to before the monarchy split. Even like during the time of the judges, during the time of Moses, Moses in the Exodus, just the Israelites repeatedly being punished for their disobedience.
Yeah, I think so. Here's where I am. To me, I'm not going to be someone who sits here and says like, I think there are some Christians out there who want to make it seem like everything in the Bible has been proven. I'm going to acknowledge that there's a great deal of obscurity to the origins, not just of the Old Testament, but even the New Testament. Like, think about it
Yeah,
this way. Well, put it this way. There are no surviving manuscripts of any New Testament document before like the year 200 AD.
yep,
But we know that these documents existed because we see people quoting them while they're who were very certainly writing in the mid second century, 150 AD, pretty much.
also
So
the linguistic patterns also match like that time period as well, the early first century.
right, exactly. So think about how many manuscripts there were in that time period, and 100% of them were lost, and that's 1,000 years after the time frame we're talking about. So here's
Yeah.
clear proof that you can have an 100% loss rate from
That's
a
a bit
time period.
different, though. That's a bit different, though. Just because people were destroying texts, there was like several large movements to destroy heretical texts that didn't
What,
exist in previous times, like with you know
yeah, you
Jewish.
can give your reasons for. And you're right. They don't exist because of reasons. Now the reasons for the Old Testament stuff might be different, but the point is, like, I think you're asking. I think, and everyone. I'm not saying I'm not being critical, but I really do think you're expecting a standard of evidence that is way beyond that what is probably realistic.
Well,
Okay,
I think anything, you know what I mean? Like for instance, the Exodus is a great example. I'm, I mean, is it even worth talking about like the Exodus? Or I mean, how do you feel about the Exodus? I feel like the evidence is so strong against the Exodus, it's not even worth talking about
well, it's
historically.
not. Well, here's the thing. It's not that there's evidence against Exodus. It's that it's unless you're
The
taking
absence
out
of evidence.
right. So I personally have not seen evidence archaeologically of the Exodus.
Yeah, and there should be. Like, that's a huge problem.
Very recently. So what should we? It's not. I think. Well, the Exodus is one thing. I
Yeah.
think what should be probably more apparent is the captivity of the Israelites in Egypt, because that supposedly was a time period that lasted several hundred years, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it
So this,
depends on which date you take from the Bible, because one date says that they were under captivity in the mid 1200s BCE during the time of Ramses II. But in the Book of Kings it says that it was 480 years before King Solomon's sixth year, which would put it at like 1446 BCE. So there's like a 200-year time difference between those two timelines.
yeah, well, exactly. Whatever it is, so I guess the point is the entire duration was at least a couple hundred years, right? So whatever time frame or initiation or ending you take from the Bible, it can't be
Right.
less than it can't be less than a couple hundred years according to the Bible, whichever number you take, right?
It
So
can
you would
be actually.
oh
There's a deep. I understand your point that you're saying, though. There should be good evidence that they were in captivity, since they were in captivity that long.
right
But
and,
I think that the evidence, it would be weaker for their captivity than it would be for their wilderness wandering, because in Egypt their captivity would be obstructed by building projects and stuff in later generations. But in the wilderness, we're talking about an area that has been continuously uninhabited since the time of the Bible, in with the part of the wilderness that they wandered in. And they give a very specific description of the route that these people took, to where if you were to read the Bible and draw a map of where it says that the direction they went and what nations they went to, your route that you drew would match every other route that anyone's ever drawn, because of how specific the pathway is given. And so they've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of excavations on that path and have found nothing. And there was over 2 million Israelites, according to the Bible, for half of a century walking around this pathway. They would have been leaving feces, they would have been leaving dead people, they would have been leaving dead animals, they would have been losing jewelry, there would have been signs of campfires and settlements and all kinds of stuff. I mean, tons. There should be all kinds of evidence for that sort of a settlement, and there's nothing. Nothing.
Well, let me throw this at you. Take the Sphinx, for example. That entire structure was buried in sand until like 100 years ago. I think originally up until about 100 years ago or so.
I was about 1700 is when the Sphinx was discovered. Oh, you mean you're talking about when they uncovered the rest of its body?
Right. So I was trying to look it up in real time, but I know that. Think about something the size of the Sphinx was buried under sand, and when they originally, unburied it, they only uncovered the head, and they thought that was all that was there. Yep. And then they later came back and realized that the head was a small fraction of the entire thing. So, and when you look at even Central America, they are still to this day discovering entire pyramid complexes in a much more greatly inhabited zone of the world than the Sinai Peninsula. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is it is to me conceivable that you have a group of people walking around approximately 3,000 years ago, or it would be no. When were the Moses was about talking traditionally here. If you take the 800, 1000 BC, what kind of remains would you expect to be so easily discoverable when we have entire giant sphinxes being buried until a few hundred years ago?
We have human remains from 70,000 years ago, when the Out of Africa event happened, in the exact same place where the Exodus wandering should have happened. So it's like if we're finding skeletons from humans from 70,000 years ago when the Out of Africa event happened there, but we're not finding the Exodus stuff.
Now, let me ask you this. This is going to get a little conspiratorial. How do you know the out of Africa skeletons aren't the archaeologists discovering the Hebrew Exodus and calling it the out of Africa theory?
I mean, they would have to be lying. I guess I'm
Right,
just I'm trusting them.
right. Or they could just be wrong. They could be wrong. They could be
Yeah.
finding these. They could be finding these things and saying, "Oh, they want to validate their out of Africa theory," which you probably know. I don't subscribe to evolution, so I don't subscribe to human evolution and the stories they tell about the dispersion across the globe. But I can very well see a scientist discovering a body of someone in the Sinai Peninsula from in a cave or some sort of preserved area. I mean, oh, yep, out of Africa, here they are, and maybe it is the remains of someone from the Exodus. I mean, it's a possibility. I'd have to look at it and see what the possibilities are.
So just think for a second. Um, so like this little area in the Sinai Peninsula is quite small. Like compared to a United States state or something, it's like a small fraction of one state. Not even. It's a really small area that they're wandering in. And just consider how big of a group 2 million people is. 2 million, roughly 600,000 men, it says, plus their wives, plus their children. That's got to be somewhere around 2 million people. And then, of course, you have their livestock. Everyone's got herds of animals that it talks about them having. So 2 million people plus probably a few 100,000 to a million animals, maybe more animals than people. I have no idea. Just a lot of animals, too. And in an area that's a fraction of the size of one US state and for half a century. So you can imagine every day, every person there is taking a shit every day for half of a century. So 365 times 50 or times 40, there are 2 million shits going in the ground every day. And those are, of course, in desert sand. This is in the desert that they're wandering in. It's been a desert since that time, and it's still a desert today. So those shits would be fossilized. They would be preserved in their exact form as they were. All of the people that died from the plagues, the thousands of people that were ravaged by the plagues, all of the people that died just due to regular circumstance, to aging, to heat exhaustion, to you name it, just people dying from the attacks from the Amalekites. I mean, we should see evidence of that battle. There's everything that happened. There should be a shitload of evidence for. And like I said, like colleges will take like whole classrooms of archaeologists and spend like a month out there. And like this is like a routine thing that happens, is going to try to discover the Exodus remains. This has been going on for 300 years now, since the time of Napoleon. People have been trying ever since Egypt was discovered. Basically, the archaeological boom kicked off, and people have been trying to discover the remains of the Bible and excavate that area. And there's just nothing there. But like when we go to Mesopotamia, for instance, there are way smaller populations than 2 million people that were living somewhere, and the evidence is a lot. We have a ton. We have graves. We have all kinds of jewelry and pottery and everything, you name it. I mean, there's evidence. If there's a settlement of people somewhere, even if it's in the tens of thousands, like a small fortress or something, they leave evidence and it gets buried and it's preserved. And those things just aren't there in the Sinai Peninsula where they were supposed to have been wandering. It just, they're for that many people. Like there were no nations around that had 2 million people. Or if there were, that would be like the biggest nation in the world. 2 million people is an inconceivably large amount of people to have been wandering that small of a portion of land on such a specific path. Like, because it says they go from this area to, this mountain to this area, like to this edge of the sea. Like it's very descriptive about which path they took, to where you can draw it exactly on a map. So I don't know. I think that there should be a lot of evidence, and there's none.
Well, let me throw again.
I'm curious. I'm almost tempted to yield the point and ask you why Yahweh can't exist, even if the Exodus is a myth, Noah's flood is a myth. How you would
Right.
feel about that? But I want to throw something else at you before I go there. Now, it's well known within people who study history that the Mayan civil. Now, I know we're talking about the other side of the world, is different context, different place, but there was the Mayan civilization had a very and also a number of civilizations in that area, not just the Mayan, but Mayans were more famous than some of the other ones. Around a certain time frame, I guess it's been a little while since I looked into the exact numbers. The Mayan the Mayan civilization completely collapsed. Or what was it? I think it's around 900 Common Era. Yeah. Okay, I'm just kind of looking at it right now. And it wasn't just the Mayan. A number of Central American and North American, Native American civilizations, for whatever reason, completely just ceased to exist. And historians have no idea what happened to them, where they went, what happened to all the people. They didn't seem to move somewhere else or relocate. They all just somehow, these civilizations just up and whatever happened, the buildings remained, but the people were gone, and no one knows exactly what happened. And that was only about 1,000 years ago. And this a tremendous mystery as to what happened to these people and where they went and why these things happen. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you're making good points about when you talk about the numbers of people involved in, but I will say it's mysterious, but it's not, to me, and again, to me, it's not outside the question that something like that could have happened. And again, let's say the Bible exaggerates the numbers. Let's say it's not 2 million. Let's say it's, I don't know, a fraction of that, maybe half, maybe less than half, maybe a quarter, maybe a tenth. It's going to be a lot of people, but at the same time, you're talking 3,000 years ago in a desert, a harsh environment, a lot of erosion, a lot of weather events, natural events could have. I can see personally, it's plausible to me that the evidence, maybe it's still out there, maybe it's been erased by quote, the sands of time.
No, it's definitely not erased if it was out there. Because like human bodies, for instance, there would have been hundreds of thousands of people dying, or at least tens of thousands, and human bodies mummify in the sand. Same with feces. Like all of those, like pottery, for instance, we have pottery from 2,000 years before the Exodus event.
Yeah, I'm not saying there aren't artifacts, but I'm saying when you're talking about a specific event at a specific time, I really think that again, I don't blame you for wanting more concrete evidence. I guess just for me, in my personal faith, when I look at the plausibility of there being this lack of evidence and the story still being at least based in truth, like based on a true story, so quote unquote, I still think it could possibly make sense. Now, I admit I can't blame the skeptics such as yourself for saying there should be more, and I can't believe something that where I would expect this to be there and it isn't there. So at this point, with the evidence we have, I can't blame you for being where you are in that particular aspect. But
Yeah.
For me, I guess for me, the original question, remember the original question you asked is, why do you believe in Yahweh? Okay.
Yes.
And even if I granted the skeptical concepts of, these biblical narratives, the flood myth, the captivity in Egypt, the Exodus, Moses, all of these things are at least probably completely, fabricated mythologies. I guess it can't be completely, because you do need Moses to get the name of God and things like that. But then you do have like the later prophets talking about Yahweh, still communicating to them in a continuous fashion. So I think that, to me, and again, a lot of Christians are going to disagree with this, even if some of the biblical narratives can be proven to be false, which I don't think that's been done, it's still plausible to me that Yahweh could exist as an entity. Okay, so how would you respond to that? Would you be willing to go there, or how do you feel about that?
No. The only
Okay.
reason I say no, well, I mean, I guess it could be like, yeah, like these stories could be true, but then we would have to grant the existence. The evidence for Yahweh is no more convincing to me than the evidence for Zeus or Enlil. So, I mean, we would have to start granting the existence of the other gods as well. If I'm going to entertain the concept of Yahweh being real, I don't see why we wouldn't entertain the concept of the other gods being real too.
Well, I think that, and again, I'm not, maybe this is part of me not fully understanding your perspective, but to me, what Yahweh is called by a particular people group in history is not as important as the concept of such a being plausible. Okay.
Yeah.
So all these different people groups can give the name or a title to this being, call it God, call it Yahweh. The question for me is it plausible to think that such a being exists? Okay. So why is it that a being of the character and essence of Yahweh seems improbable to you, or does it seem improbable to you?
Well, yeah, it seems improbable because the concept already existed with a bunch of other gods before Yahweh. But on its face, there's no reason that some creator deity or, a storm or warrior god couldn't exist. But it's just, when we take into consideration the fact that this is a time period when that's exactly what everybody was doing, was creating deities to, or even more specifically, modeling their own storm deity off of this circulating story that really circulated mostly because of the Epic of Gilgamesh. It was really only after the Epic of Gilgamesh and Atrahasis that these stories started circulating out. But when we consider that all of these different cultures are doing what the Jews did, I just don't see. I don't see why it's any different, or why, because I definitely don't believe these other gods from the other cultures are real. I mean, their stories are insanely fantastic and clearly just reflect the morality of people from 4,000 years ago. It's not any. There's nothing divine or believable about any of them.
Is there any concept of a being like God that you would think could be possible?
Yeah, I think that a god is likely.
Oh, okay. Just not one
I,
that specifically relates to humanity, or like what
yeah,
kind
well,
what
I think that the invention of gods on Earth is a coincidence. Like, if there is a god out there, I think that the concept of us inventing the idea of a god on Earth is just a coincidence. It's not based off of us experiencing this God that exists, or God visiting Earth or something like that. I don't think that at all. Just from reading our earliest literature where people talk about gods, we're talking 2,500 to 3,000 years before Jesus in ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. I can't stress enough that these gods were literally just personifications of natural forces. They were just giving personalities and stories to storm, sun, death. They were just like giving it a storyline and giving it a personality, but really, like, there's a whole metaphor happening where they're talking about like an agricultural cycle or a flood cycle or something like that, and they're just using metaphors to talk about these gods. Like, there's no reality to it. So then when I see Yahweh just so clearly and painfully obviously doing what all of these other gods did, and even way more specifically Ishkur Adad, the storm god, and not only that, but seeing that the Greeks did it, The Indians did it. The Egyptians did it. The Hittites did it. The Canaanites did it. Everyone is adopting this tradition of making the storm god that's associated with bulls and lightning weaponry, and it defeats the multi-headed sea dragon to save the world from chaos. All of these cultures have that exact same theme. That's how Yahweh started out. In the oldest texts about Yahweh, the oldest Hebrew, the most Proto-Hebrew layers preserved in our Old Testament are like the Song of Deborah, the Song of Moses, and things like that. And they almost explicitly just talk about God being a storm mountain deity, and repeated references to bands on bull imagery. And that fits that pattern perfectly. It also, like in Isaiah, for instance, when Isaiah talks about Leviathan, Isaiah literally directly quotes the Ugaritic Baal cycle about Baal-Hadad defeating the seven-headed sea dragon, which is exactly what Leviathan is, a seven-headed sea dragon. But this is in 1400 BCE, probably about 700 years before our oldest biblical writings, like Isaiah or Amos, or for instance, are probably the oldest stuff that we have.
Okay.
But other than the Song of Moses and stuff. And these, like the Song of Moses and the Song of Deborah, are dated to like 1000, 1100 maybe. And these Ugaritic myths about Baal Hadad go back to 1400 BCE, before the Bronze Age collapse happened. And Isaiah is like directly quoting from a story where Baal Hadad, just like Yahweh, uses a lightning bow and arrow to kill a seven-headed sea dragon whose name is cognate with Leviathan. It's Lotan. And it uses the same root, the same Semitic root, the LTN root, Leviathan, Lotan. And it's a seven-headed sea dragon that the storm god defeats with a lightning bow and arrow, just like Yahweh in the Psalms. But yeah, the oldest writings about Yahweh depict him as a storm warrior god that comes down from the mountain, and defeats the evil sea dragon of chaos.
Okay, so that story is apparently in Isaiah 27. I just want to read the context of that. In the day the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent.
Yeah,
He will
the
count
twisting serpent, where it says the twisting serpent, the fleeing serpent, like those very specific terms. I mean, twisting is pretty predictable, I guess, but fleeing serpent, like in the Baal cycle, that's the part that it copies. That's the part that it actually quotes from. It literally says the words, the twisting serpent, the fleeing serpent, in the Baal cycle, talking about the seven-headed sea dragon.
Okay, well, I'd have to look into that. I'm not saying it's. I mean, it could be.
But I wanted to say really quick also,
Yeah, go ahead.
the Ugaritic pantheon they're not the only ones that engage in this. Like that started in Mesopotamia with Tiamat and the highest god Enlil fighting the god of chaos, Tiamat, who is the sea goddess, and she would, in Mesopotamian mythology, she would summon sea beasts to cause the flood, and that spread out into the Hittite territory, which is like Syria in between Canaan and Mesopotamia. And the Hurrians and the Hittites picked it up, and they greatly evolved the story. They kept the same framework, obviously, but they changed a lot of things. That's where the sea dragon, like Tiamat, the god of the sea, gets completely left out of the picture, and it's just the sea dragon controlling the chaos now, which is what we see in the Baal cycle and in the Bible. But
Let's just start one. I want to go down a list for you. So the first thing that the Bible says about God in Genesis, and we can argue whether it's borrowed from some other pre-existing culture, whatever, but it says that God is the creator, basically the creator of the heavens and the earth, so all things. So is at least that concept of God believable to you, that there is an intelligent creator of heaven and earth?
Yeah. I mean, maybe I don't see a reason why that couldn't happen, but I also don't see a reason why you would think that.
Okay, let's keep going. So right after that, it says, again, I'm not asking if you're a young Earth creationist, but what I'm asking you is, it does say God created living things, the plants and the animals. Do you think that concept of God transcends religion and is a plausible theory about something that God is and that God did?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
It would have to be like God created animals and then because I do believe that evolution happened. So for me to accept that belief framework, it would have to be like God created animals and they evolved into what they are today. And the Bible
Right.
is wrong about the timeline or something, or the timeline is
Okay.
symbolic.
Okay. So at least that original presentation of we can argue about the details and the exact framing of how the narrative goes, but the Bible's presentation of God as being the creator of the universe and the creator of life is plausible. Now, you would need a reason why that should be accepted above and beyond naturalism, right?
Yeah.
But so far, we have a God that transcends any local deity or deified concept of God, and is plausible within the realm of rational thought. Can't be, hasn't been ruled out by simple observations of history and connections between evolution of ideas. It's just something that could be an idea of God that makes sense outside of cultural context. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. All right, so we have the creator and a creator of the universe and a creator of life, a God. All right, so let's go to the next thing. Again, let's ignore the specific narratives, but we have a God that's interacting with specific people, namely, starting with I guess Adam and Eve. I'm not asking you to believe that, but when you come to the patriarchs, you have Abraham, and down on that line, does it make sense to you that God, if there is a real God who created the universe and created living things, that he could communicate to them in a way that they would, at least some people would understand, right? Because is that
Yep.
plausible to you?
Yeah.
Okay. So if that God spoke to these people and communicated to them through at least one person, let's call that person a prophet, and they asked, like, what should I call you? And he said, my name is this. That's also something that could be a possible, something that could be possibly accepted by you, right?
Yep.
Okay, so even if there's another people group out there that, made up a concept of God and gave that God its own name, even though it's totally fabricated.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think I see what you're saying. Are you trying to say that the other gods of the other nations were also Yahweh?
No, not at all.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say is what I'm trying to communicate to you is this. They did fabricate ideas about God and give them names, and we're not actually communicating. But that does not negate the possibility that at least one people group really did communicate with a real God. Because remember, the point is, something you acknowledged is that God could communicate. God created the universe, God created life, and that God can interact and communicate with the people He's created. So the key is
Right.
finding the key for people in our time would be looking back and trying to find if there is such a case that we can narrow down and say, while all these other ones are fabricating ideas of God, it seems that this one had a special case that could be based in reality as opposed to these other more naturalistic cultural explanations. You see what I'm saying?
Well, I think even according to the Bible, these other gods did exist.
Really?
Yeah, definitely. God even interacts with a different God, well, not verbally, but physically interacts with a different God. Multiple gods, two different gods.
Okay, so I mean, this is me. I will admit, I'm not as familiar with the Old Testament as I am with the New Testament.
Mhm.
Um, do you happen to remember where this occurred in
Yes,
the
I
Old
do.
Testament?
I'm opening my Bible right now. Give me 1 second.
Okay, because I just want to look at it.
I'm going to be using the NRSV UE translation
All
because
right.
it uses the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint.
Okay.
Okay, 148. Sorry. So Deuteronomy. It's in Deuteronomy 32. It'll be Deuteronomy 32, chapters 8 through 10. Oh, whoops.
Deuteronomy chapter 32.
Yep, 8 through 10.
Oh,
So
okay.
it says, when the Most High apportioned the nations, so when that we're talking about the Creator God, right? The Most High God, and he's divvying out the nations to his sons. And this is a widely occurring concept that exists all across the ancient Near East. The sons of God. There are 70 sons of God. Each God rules over a different nation. That's a repeating concept that existed across several cultures in the ancient Near East before the Bible, immediately before the Bible, especially in the Ugaritic pantheon, which is most important to this. But so it says, when the Most High apportioned the nations, when he divided humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of the gods. So, and
Okay.
like I said, this is coherent. This is consistent with what we know about the ancient Near East. There's a high god, El, or in Mesopotamia, it's Anu, and he has a whole pantheon of gods that are his sons, and they're literally called the sons of God. And that's what this is talking about. And so, divided humankind, fixed the boundaries of the people according to the number of gods. Yahweh's own portion was his people, Jacob, his allotted share. So what it's saying is that this high God, but most high, it literally uses the name of the Canaanite god El and puts an epithet after his name, Elyon, which means most high, but it literally uses El instead of Elohim. It says when God, or I'm sorry, when El Most High gave each nation to a different God, he gave the nation of Israel to Yahweh. So this is Yahweh interacting with a God that is above him. Yahweh is one of the sons of God in Deuteronomy.
All right, we have a number of guests here, but before objective ethics and set scales speak, I do want to just address this. So, something I've noticed, and this is my ignorance, when it comes to this verse, Deuteronomy 32:8, I've noticed looking at the parallel translations, is a number of different ways that this has been translated.
To sons of
And
Israel. It's been changed to sons of Israel.
yeah, but there are a couple translations that say things like, according to the number in his heavenly court,
Yeah.
and according to, wait, let me see, what does this one say? According to the number of the sons of God.
Right, that's the oldest. The Dead Sea Scrolls render it as B'nai Elohim, and the Greek Septuagint, which renders everything aside from Yahweh as an angel, calls them the angels of God instead of. And then after that, like 200 years later, after that, or 100 years after the time of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Septuagint, we start seeing the sons of Israel popping up in translation instead of the sons of God or the angels of God. And that's a
Hmm.
clear theological shift.
Well, this is another. So, Objective Ethics got me on something a couple days ago, and this is another one where I'm just going to have to admit that there is an open question about what is exactly being said here. And I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm not saying you're right. I'm just saying that this is an area for me to study and try and figure out if they're who is presenting the proper translation here. And if you're saying that
Well,
that's
I would typically go with the oldest one if we can.
yeah, I agree. I agree. So the Dead Sea Scrolls would probably, be more accurate in my opinion. And
Yeah.
I see a number of translations that do exactly that. So this is interesting. And again, it's again more information to consider and to try to see how it all harmonizes with everything else.
Could I
So I'm not going to
quickly,
say, yeah,
could I
go
just
ahead.
give one more quick example?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. And then objective ethics will speak, and then set scales will speak. And Andy, if you have to
Okay.
go or if you want to stay, it's up to you. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to also point out there's another example, and I don't remember the exact chapter and verse for this, but it's in the book of Kings. And Yahweh leads some of the Judahite kings into battle against the Moabites, or it might have been Israelites. I can't remember now. He leads one of the groups with the Edomites or something into a battle with the Moabites, and Yahweh goes with them into battle. And then they go to battle with the Moabites, and the Moabites are getting their asses kicked by the Judahites. And so the king of Moab, King Mesha, he sacrifices his son. He sacrifices his firstborn son, like as an offering to the god Chemosh, which is the god of the Moabites. And the Israelites immediately lose the battle after Mesha's sacrifice of his son. And this battle between the Israelites and the Moabites, where Mesha sacrifices his son and defeats the Israelites, is actually a real battle that actually happened and is inscribed on the Moabite stone, or it's also called the Mesha stele, and it's just a big stone written in Moabite that describes the battle against the Israelites and how Yahweh was defeated, and the King Mesha carried off Yahweh's vessels. It actually uses Yahweh's name on the Moabite stone.
Okay. It looks like it's in 2 Kings chapter 3.
Yeah, it's at the beginning of one of them.
I just want to quickly look at this just to hmm.
Maybe you'll interpret it differently than me. That's the way I read it.
Well, it's not that I haven't. The thing is, I'd have to read it, and I don't want to spend the next 5 minutes reading it and delaying. So what I'm going to do is look at it at another time and see, because it looks like there is also validity to this. So all I can say is for now is I'll take a look at it, and it's interesting. Again, it's something to be considered for sure. But just out of respect for the people who joined the panel,
Yeah. Hey, Daniel. Hey, Dominic.
Yeah. So objective ethics. Why don't you take a minute or two to introduce yourself and anything you have to say, and then set scales. Same thing.
Okay, I'll try and be quick because I know I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So the first thing I have to say is I just want to commend both of you gentlemen. This was a very civil discussion. A lot of great information was exchanged, and it was a pleasure to listen to. I do want to say, Andrew, this is something that I've actually studied quite a bit, is the historical framework of world religions, and everything you said is spot on with critical scholarship. And I'm not a theologian, as far as I don't have degrees in this, but I've spent a lot of money and time in college studying world religions, and I even attended Bible seminary. Or Bible college, Christian seminary. So I do have a familiarity with this, and it's really refreshing to hear somebody lay it out as clearly as you did without being antagonistic about it. You're absolutely spot on with the what historians and critical scholars are saying about the etymology of Yahweh, the origin of how the nature gods get developed over time. You didn't get into the science and the psychology of it, but it goes back to the hyperactive agency detection device, where why are we creating these gods in the first place? And it comes down to a lot of things that you did kind of brush over, where they needed their crops to grow, so the rain was very important, so on and so forth. So you did such a great job. It was such a pleasure listening to you. I'd love to have you stop by my channel sometime, and we can really deep dive into that stuff, because I find it very fascinating, and I'm really impressed with your mannerisms as well as your knowledge. What he did mention, and he didn't touch on this part, but I'm sure given more time he would have, is that you mentioned Genesis. Genesis doesn't come around until the Babylonian exile. From critical scholarship, take it or leave it or whatever you want, but critical scholarship dates that around the Babylonian exile. And so you get it's called the Enuma Elish. All right, and this is ultimately the Babylonians' version of the Sumerian creation myth. And you get the 7 tablets of creation, and there's really good scholarship on how Genesis is formulated after the 7 tablets of creation. And I'm not going to run you through the whole, like, everything that we could find on it, but just let me give you a brief. The Enuma Elish would later be the inspiration for the Hebrew scribes who created the text now known as the biblical book of Genesis. Prior to the 12th century, the Bible was considered the oldest book in the world, and its narratives were thought to be completely original. In the mid-19th century, however, European museums, as well as academic and religious institutions, sponsored excavations in Mesopotamia to find physical evidence for historical corroboration of the stories in the Bible. These excavations found quite the opposite. However, in that once cuneiform was translated, it was understood that a number of biblical narratives were Mesopotamian in origin. And I could go on and on and on. I don't want to take up too much of my time here, but I just want to say thank you for letting me be a part of this fascinating conversation.
Okay. I have things to think about that, but I did say I would let Set Scales go first. So let's hear what Set Scales has to say. I don't think you've ever been on this channel before, but welcome, and feel free to introduce yourself and you comment as you see appropriate. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey, I've never been on this channel. I saw it in my feed, so I thought I'd join. I'm pretty sure I've seen this Andy guy before on Jack Talcott. And I've definitely seen Objective Ethics on D&W show, but I mainly talk about occult stuff and esoteric stuff on my channel and natural law, and building off of what Objective Ethics was talking about. I'm fairly confident that Yahweh is an Anunnaki god, and the most phonetically similar name to Yah would be Ea, so he would be Enki, even though he seems to more resemble Enlil in his mannerisms. But I think the Bible is just talking about these gods and their sons and their father, because I heard Andy talk about how El was Yah's father, so really that'd just be Anu, the father of the gods. And the ruling class, I personally think that they were real people. I don't really think they were aliens. I think they were just a class of people who understood things like measurement. They understood how to manipulate matter and elements in a way that other people didn't. And they understood how to compartmentalize people and divide them so that they would be efficient workers. And these people came along and they established a civilization unlike anything before them, or maybe there was something like them before them, and they just did their own thing. But whatever they did was so successful that the people basically, I think they just flocked to them. They flocked to these new city states and these new farms that were being produced, and they loved the new tools that they had. Like the plow is described as being given a gift from the gods. And they loved things like aqueducts. These were unprecedented until I think about 35 or 3400 BC. And these things created a surplus of material, which basically the people had to rely on the land for resources before, but now with the cities, now there's material gain and output unlike anything before. And then ever since then, basically people's values has been equated to their output. And I think that's really what all these religions are about. I think it's about convincing people to conform to the standard of the ruling class so that they can use them as workers.
I mean, don't you think there are better ways to do that than inventing this entire like fantastical scheme that from an anthropological standpoint, do you really think ancient humans were so much different? I'm trying to think if I don't think people are going to listen to somebody going out there and talking about you know, all these things without there being some basis in reality to them, and just conforming and listening to them and just taking orders. I mean, well, maybe there are examples of this, but do you really think that at the initiation of these religions that's something that people would do?
The ruling class needed a way to justify their rulership over the cities. The whole purpose of the cities is to get people to come to them so that they can work for you. But if people didn't accept the king's rulership and they decided to work for themselves or figure out some other way that didn't revolve around a coercive hierarchical structure, they would do so. So the kings needed, or whoever was in charge of the cities, they needed mythology to justify their rulership. And this is where we get divine mandates. This is where we get things like Hammurabi's Code, the first law system ever written. Where does it come from? It comes from the god Enlil. It's with his authority. So they needed their mythology to justify their nonsense. But there was real spiritual things. There's real spiritual things, and they're trying to supplant these real spiritual things.
I don't know. It seems to me like a lot of religion is not so much geared towards creating a governmental structure as it is creating a framework for worship. I'm trying to think about it from the perspective of the people who are trying to control the masses. Okay. And the specific methodologies they chose when it comes to the various religions they created, I really don't see that being realistic, personally. I think that if people wanted to control others psychologically to work for them, that I mean, I'm not saying they wouldn't tell stories that made them believe things, but when I look at the Bible and read it as a whole, and it just doesn't strike me as realistic that this is a control mechanism at all.
Well, I just wanted to chime in really quick. Look at the book of Leviticus, for example. The book of Leviticus is almost an entire book of basically commanding them to give everything to the Levite priests. It seems, just reading it, like I almost break out in laughter because it reads like a Levite priest scamming a bunch of Jews into giving up all their sacrifices so that they can have it for themselves. And they're just saying that God told them to do it.
Yeah, but I mean, even in the Bible, you're talking about kings. It was a long. I mean, even in the Bible, it says that kings didn't come around until way later. So it's telling you that kings aren't authoritative until like halfway through the narrative. You know what I'm saying? So how does that? You would expect it to start off like you know, if you read the Old Testament at the beginning, the kings weren't the ones who were in authority. First, that's why the book of Judges, because they were judges.
Yeah.
And but even before that, it was the prophets.
Right.
So,
yeah, I see what you're saying, that they weren't kings, but I'm just saying it's people are using their authority, or people are writing stories that grants them authority. That's what the Levites did, assuming that the Levites are writing this, these stories that repeatedly glorify the Levites. It seems like they did. And if that's what they did do, then they're using those stories for political control and monetary control.
What Andy and Set Scales are saying is absolutely spot on, A's. And the thing that we need to consider is human psychology, the psychology behind it, the hyperactive agency detection device, which is how the brain works, is we want to ascribe, it's part of evolution, it's part of our survival mechanism, is to try and ascribe agency to phenomenon that we experience. So like I talked about today on the channel, I think it might have been after you left, but that rustling in the bushes, we want to ascribe agency to that, right? So we think, okay, is that a lion? That's really helpful to our survival to figure out that might be a dangerous animal in the bushes. We develop thoughts and ideas and philosophies and rules and all kinds of regulations around this hyperactive agency detection device. Science, as it progresses, teaches us, no, that rustling in the bushes, it could be a lion, but you know what? It could be the wind also. So this is just how the psychology of the human mind works. The God of the gaps fallacy is ultimately identified as a fallacy, but it's how the human mind worked. When we didn't understand why the rain fell, we gave it a agent, a God, so on and so forth. So this became a very effective tool, just like Set Scales was talking about, and like Andrew's alluding to here. This becomes a very effective tool for manipulating and managing people, because people don't have the scientific, the education, the scientific understanding, or the education to understand what makes the rainfall or what makes this happen. So they are gullible to the leaders to lead them and explain to them why these things are happening when they don't have an explanation, because they don't have the understanding either. They pull this God, seems to be the phenomenon that all cultures across the world use, which may be evidence that there is a God. I don't know. I'm an agnostic. So maybe it's true. Maybe what Set Scales is saying is true. Maybe there is a God behind all this, but it makes sense that it becomes a supernatural explanation, because they didn't have an understanding of the natural, because science was so far removed from their understanding of things. So there's a real psychology that puts all these pieces together.
Yeah, by anthropomorphizing nature and equating it to the very gods who are giving them authority, the common people, they just fell in line. And not only this, it straight up says in Atrahasis and the Enuma Elish that the gods basically created human beings in their image to be slaves and workers.
I mean, I'm not denying that religious structures have been used to oppress people. And I've heard the idea of the detection agency thing. To me, I think that's more presupposition of evolutionary theory. I think God just designed us to, be wary of things. I don't see why that shouldn't be viewed as as a possible hypothesis. And as far as let me address everything that was said. I mean, the moral code that is in Judaism and Christianity. I just don't think if someone wanted to make people subservient, there's just a lot of things in there that are superfluous, and to me, it's making it look like it's all about control. No, there's a lot of moral stuff about helping others and, being a good person to everyone else, loving your neighbor and things like that. I mean, why would you throw all this stuff in there if your only goal was to make them, basically mind control slaves? Like, what's the purpose of all that?
But I think that you're viewing it the wrong way. I think that I don't think that any of these things happened as like one person sitting down and just writing out a law code to control people. It was probably more likely a really slow process that happened over time and was, not just they probably had a collection of oral traditions that dated back centuries that they were keeping records of on papyrus or vellum or stone tablets or whatever, you name it. I'm sure they had some traditions that went back, and they were probably adding these manipulative stories about the Levites and the Judahites onto those pre-existing traditions and weaving them together into a indistinguishable narrative.
So Set Scales, I mean, we could talk about, this really, I guess this is to everyone. First of all, I really don't think that these evolutionary, cultural, progressive ideas of why religion formed are the case. I think that the reason religions form is because people have experiences and they interpret them as being divine or supernatural, and then religions build around them. And then the only question becomes, are these people psychos who are having, hallucinations? And we could talk about Muhammad or Jesus or Buddha or any of the Old Testament prophets. But I don't think religions, even to this day, you have all kinds of people talking about how they have experiences where they think they saw an angel or they think they saw God or Jesus or whatever it is. And I really think this serves as a better explanation for why religions originate than the idea of, oh, we don't understand why the rain falls, so there's a guy out there who's making it rain. That's really simplistic in my opinion.
That's what they did, though. Like, there's such a clear record of it in ancient Mesopotamian tablets. Like, I don't know if you knew this, but like the Natural History Museum of Britain, the British History Museum, the British History Museum alone has like 130,000 Sumerian clay tablets, and that's just one museum. Just to like give a small picture of how broad our understanding of ancient Sumeria is, or ancient Sumer, sorry. It's really deep. We have a really broad understanding of ancient Sumer, and it just doesn't really, it's not consistent with that idea.
So
I don't
go
want
ahead.
to deny. I don't want to deny the fact that there are good interpretations that we can take from spiritual texts and apply it to our lives and live a better life. Okay, I
Me
I
neither.
know that wholeheartedly. Right? Like you look to Jesus, or you can look to the Tao Te Ching. These are things that tell you how to live a good life. And even the gods, in their own twisted way, have principles and morals that they stick by. And that's what it's all about. It's all about developing principles. And because I look at reality as an interconnected web of experiences, like you said, but the experiences we have are all ours. But it's held together by responsibility.
So wait, so it says Scales, you acknowledge the reality of the possibility of there being these spiritual experiences, but you deny the possibility that any of the world religions could be the product of these valid experiences. That's kind of interesting to me.
Well, like I said, I think that modern religions, going back to the time of Mesopotamia and the time of the first civilizations, attempt to supplant the natural spiritual belief of humanity and basically make it seem like some sort of ruling class, like the government or the priest, like they're God, and they're not. God is all around us. That was the ancient spiritual belief, and that's what we lack. They're
So
basing
what?
it off the truth, though, because all liars can do is they take what's true and they twist it to serve their own purposes.
So when you all right, where in the Bible does the control mechanism begin? Because I was just talking with Andy. We went through the
I would
first
say
chapter.
Genesis 1:27.
Amos.
Genesis 1:27, the false god lays out his false commandment, which is where he tells the people to establish dominion over the earth, the fish, the water, the creatures on the land, and subdue it. And we can see this in the most famous, I don't know how to share screen, but I would if I could, but the most famous Akkadian Anunnaki cylinder scroll depicts exactly this. It has a god, Enki, in the water doing the fish. It has birds flying in the sky and then God subduing them. There's a goddess with a big old knife. I mean, it's literally the Bible is copied straight from Mesopotamia. That, like, when they were in
Well, I'm not trying to dispute that, and I'm not saying I disagree. I'm not disputing what I'm trying to get you to understand is, God telling humans to take control over their own destinies and develop the earth is a far fly from obey your masters. Just be mindless lemmings who just work till you die for the people telling you what to do.
But that's not what God says, though. God says to establish dominion over the earth and subdue it.
What's wrong with that?
We're not. It's like we're a higher power than the earth, and we're not. We're not more valuable than the other life forms.
It's not saying we're more valuable. It's just saying you will acknowledge that human. Do you acknowledge human exceptionalism?
Yes, I point this out in my own videos on my channel. I even made this.
Okay, so humans are exceptional. Humans are exceptional because we've been created exceptional. And again, I'm going after your framework. where you want to say God telling humans to be fruitful, which means be prosperous, is somehow a control mechanism from these tyrants. No, that's God blessing humanity through these texts.
No, that's God commanding humanity to establish some sort of dominion in the form of civilization over the earth.
I see
Which
no
which eventually he does through Cain, who goes out.
so let me ask you this. So let's go back to the caveman era where we just kind of walk around, and I guess we can't even have like little, animal skins covering ourselves because we're taking dominion over the animals to get those. I guess we could take them from carcasses, but what level of anti-progress? Where do you want to take us back? The caveman? I'm just curious because we can't form cities and civilized nations in your view. So what are we supposed to do?
We need to synthesize the egalitarian lifestyle of human beings before civilization developed with the modern gnosis of technology and science, and make science redundant, technology redundant, distributable, easily repairable, easily replaced, and above all, not centralized. It needs to be decentralized. That's what we need to do. Synthesize the knowledge of today with the wisdom of the past. And that will create a far better future than what we're doing now.
And let me guess, the Bible has none of the wisdom of the past. It's just a control mechanism, right?
The Bible has a lot of good stuff in it. The problem is that it's just been interpreted and reinterpreted in a way that's confusing.
Okay. I can accept that it's been poorly interpreted in many cases. All right.
Hey, wait.
Go ahead, Andy.
I just wanted to add one thing. If you were talking about when you were asking when this control mechanism over other people began in the Bible, in my opinion, because I don't think that a wide majority of the Torah existed before the Babylonian exile. I think that's a post-Persian concept, actually, probably Hellenistic. But I think that the beginning of the control over other people, as far as one group of humans using the text to control other people, the earliest example of that, in my opinion, would be in the book of Amos, which is the oldest prophetic literature. And aside from the very short early layers in Genesis and Exodus, Amos is pretty much the oldest literature that we have. And Amos, if you go through the book of Amos, it starts off by demonizing each of the nations around Canaan for what they've done. This person ravaged the wives of these people. This person, sacrificed to this god or whatever. Moab and Tyre and, Aram, Damascus, everybody gets named. Gaza. He's bitching them all out. Amos says he's the prophet, and he's saying that they're all gonna get their own little punishment. And then he gets a couple chapters in and then just spends the entire rest of the book demonizing Israel but Judah was listed among these other nations around Canaan that, they just fucked up and they're going to get their punishment, and it's small. For each nation, like for Aram, Damascus, for Moab, for Gaza, blah, 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 they just get like, a couple verses each. It's like a minute's worth of reading for each one, including Judah. He kind of bitches Judah out for, I don't remember what, and says they're going to get punished. But then when he goes to Israel, it's like several chapters of him bitching out Israel for what they've done. And so that is the beginning of the Judahite glorification, where they're glorifying the Judahites over the Israelites to control the people. And then later that shifts to a priestly glorification, where they start glorifying a specific class within the Judahites, the Levitical priests, and that eventually switches to the Zadokian priests, and then I can't remember after that. But yeah, my point is that it begins with the early prophets, and Isaiah does the same thing. Isaiah, glorifies the shit out of Judah, and Isaiah, by the way, is Amos's son. They're both prophets, father and son. So Isaiah and Hosea, they do the exact same thing. They glorify Judah. They demonize Israel, and they use that for political control. They say that they're claims from God. I mean, there's no proof that they weren't claims from God, but they're presenting these things that demonize Israel and glorify Judah, and give Judah claim to this and that, and justify the actions of Judah as like a divine decree from God. So that that is definitely evidence that that's what they're doing anyway. And it begins with the prophets.
Can I just
Okay.
step in here real quick?
Go
Just
ahead.
real quick to just
Go ahead.
one question I have. I don't know how long you have to go, Ace, so I want to get this question in sooner than later. Set scales. I really enjoyed listening to what you had to say. I'm curious if you're a non-dualist or some kind of idealist, by just out of curiosity, because that's kind of resonating with me by the things you're talking about. Not a criticism, just curious about that. I'm totally in agreement with what Andrew's saying. Or Andy thoughts. I don't know what you prefer to be called. Andrew, here's what I'm saying. The only so like with Amos, critical scholarship puts that as the oldest complete work. Obviously, bits and pieces from Psalms and Proverbs could be considered the oldest actual text within the Bible, but the complete works of Psalms and Proverbs is not the oldest. Amos would be the oldest complete text, and that goes back to the middle of the 8th century. But the only pushback I would give to what he was saying is that I don't think, in my view, based on the reading and with critical scholarship, I think that the Torah, the first 5 books, definitely compiled between the Babylonian period and which would be the Babylonian exile, but before the Greco-Roman period. So somewhere between like 565 to maybe, I would say 450, maybe a little bit sooner than that, or more relative to that, later than that, depending on how you want to see BC to CE. But I don't think it goes quite to the Hellenistic period. But other than that, I'm totally in line with what he was saying. And to A's, I think you were asking about when did this idea of using these religious beliefs to control people, when did that start? I think really that goes way beyond the written record, because you got to remember that by the time we get to cuneiform, the first writing system, Sumer was fully developed as a city. They already had animal husbandry, farming, and all that stuff fully developed. So we don't get written record until after this stuff is they had a fully developed story that, like they were talking about with the Enuma Elish. We get the Babylonian version of it, but we know that goes back to Sumer. The Epic of Gilgamesh, everybody's heard about that at this point. That's way into developed societies. So these oral traditions and these ideas predate anything we could ever really trace back historically. But if you look back into what paleontologists are talking about and archaeologists, we have evidence that cavemen were maybe burying people with burial rituals or burial rites and things of that nature, different things going on that we can't really give a definitive answer as to, oh, this is definitely what was happening. But we have good clues and good evidence that these people were developing these thoughts long before, tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of years before we get a written record, so depending on what you're willing to accept from paleontology and stuff. So this stuff goes way back. But if you look at the Bible and the way it's organized chronologically, right, not as far as which books were written first and last, but the way it's presented to us from Genesis all the way to Revelations, you see this developing. You see, like Set Scales mentioned the Code of Hammurabi. You look at the 613 Mosaic laws, which is when the rules really started to become actually like codified, the codification of the law, right? That is telling you specifically, hey, look, give your firstborn the first right, everything, right? It's the first fruits is what they call it in the Old Testament, to the priests. Just like Andrew was talking about. Then you go all the way through the New Testament, right? Jesus, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? Pay your taxes. Paul, slaves, obey your masters. You get this from the oldest, the beginning of the Bible, all the way through to the end of the Bible. And the reward for the humble and the meek is going to be a later reward in heaven that you're going to hope for, and they're going to tell you is coming to you. But what they want is subservience to the system, and they organize this and orchestrate all of this stuff around these beliefs. Now, does that mean it's not true? Absolutely not. Does it mean it's useful? Fucking A, it is. And you could look all throughout history to see this. Voltaire has talked about this. Marx talked about this. A number of atheist and deistic philosophers have talked about the usefulness of religion. If you want to get a bunch of people to do some really terrible shit, use religion as the motivation. That's just a historical fact, and it's in writing all throughout history. So to say that it's not It doesn't make sense with the hyperactive agent detection device. And where did this all start? That just doesn't bear out as a good argument against what I'm saying about this. It's absolutely useful, and it has been used for a lot of terrible stuff. Catholics were burning Protestants at the stake because they weren't believing in the Trinitarian, so on and so forth. So the Crusades, and I could go on and on, Salem witch trials. So it's very useful as a motivation, because you're talking about a God that watches you when you're asleep. You're talking about granting people eternal life as a reward. I mean, these things are very powerful motivations.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to respond quickly to everything that's said. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to read 3 short passages from the Bible. And I just want the audience to hear what the Bible actually says. And I hope it's not going to take long. And then what I'm going to do, because of time constraints, we're going to have to shut down the stream just because I actually have to go to sleep pretty soon here. But this has been a good conversation. So I want to be able to end it in a way that we all get a chance to express ourselves. And let me just so render unto Caesar was brought up. And I want to just read the full quote. This is Mark 12:17. And Jesus said to them, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. So the last thing you're going to do if you're inventing a religion based on controlling people is make people think that, Caesar isn't God, that there's someone other than God to whom we owe allegiance. Isaiah chapter 1, the first chapter of Isaiah, verse 16, wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Remove the evil of your deeds from my sight. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Reprove the ruthless. Defend the orphan. Plead for the widow. And then Matthew 22, again, we have Jesus. One of the lawyer asked him a question, testing him, teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? He said to them, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments, the whole law and prophets rest. So, yes, God is trying to get us to obey his commands. And his commands are to be good people and love each other and do the right thing and not be evil and to be righteous. And there's nothing wrong with God demanding that we be good, righteous people. This is the purpose of Christianity. Did parts of it, the Old Testament, potentially get corrupted by people who wanted to manipulate the masses? I'm not going to try and deny that. But what I'm trying to say is the heart and soul of these religions is to make people better and to make a better world. And absolutely, people have twisted them and turned them to do the most evil and horrible things you can imagine. There's no doubt about that. But they did that against what is being taught, not because of what is being taught. So I don't want to take the last word. So what we're going to do is we're going to give people final words. And what I'm going to do is each person take like 2 to 3 minutes to just say whatever you want. You can tell people what your channel is. You can try to refute what I just said. You can try to summarize your thoughts on everything that's already been said, whatever it may be. But try to keep it limited so we're not here forever. And reverse order, set scales is first, then objective ethics, then Andy was first. So set scales, go ahead. 2 or 3 minutes, go ahead.
Yeah, so when it comes to religion, I look at it as 2 ways, and I interpret it in the etymological sense, religare, meaning to bind. So there's 2 ways that I interpret it. Either we're binding ourselves to physical things and identities based in materialism, or things like political parties or race, or identifying as a Christian or a Buddhist or any of these things. These things are of the material world and are ultimately fleeting. But or I should say, by binding yourself to these things, you're basically limiting yourself and putting yourself in a box. But there's another thing that you can bind yourself to, and that is God, basically. You can bind yourself directly to God, no middleman required, just by developing principles in alignment with God's truth. And you discover this on your own. It's different for everyone, but the principle is basically everyone has the right to live their life the way they want to, and everyone has the right to be left alone. And if you interfere with another being's ability to interact in the world, you're basically violating the eternal principle. So the other way to interpret religion is to bind yourself to God, or bind yourself to your higher self or your soul through the highest self principles, or God's principles. Right. So this is what I think the highest spiritual truth is to develop principles in alignment with eternal truth.
All right, Set Scales. Thank you. You're certainly welcome to future panels to elaborate your ideas and elaborate your ideas and continue this discussion. So I hope you'll join us again, and make sure to subscribe, and hope to see you again.
Yeah. I also uploaded a video today too, if anyone wants to check that out.
Yeah, you so you have your own channel?
Yeah.
So how can people find your channel? Is it just look up Set Scales? Will they find it on YouTube if they do a search for Set Scales?
They should.
Okay. All right. Hope to talk to you again.
All right.
All right, Objective, you're next.
Yeah, I just want to, for one thing, I want to add on to what the brother was saying, Set Scales, because he's right about the etymology, but it goes even deeper than that, because it's not just to bind, but it's the same word is used for to stitch, or as in a suture. So what that means is that there is a wound, something, a gaping hole, a gash, and it needs to be stitched up with something. So religio is not just to bind, but to stitch something, as in to stitch a wound. And religion definitely feels that need. And so that's why I'm not an anti-theist, because a lot of that resonates with me. In fact, most of what he said, Set Scales, resonates with me, because even though I'm an agnostic, I do believe in objective morality. As many of you know who follow me on other channels, my own channel, Objective Ethics, I do believe in objective morality, and I build the argument up from the fact that we are all equal as human beings. We're all moral agents. Agency means we set goals and take actions. In order to accomplish any of our goals, we need our freedom and well-being. And because every human being needs their freedom and well-being, we ought not interfere with each other's freedom and well-being. And I just build the model up from there. So I do think that, what he was talking about, let live and let live is kind of how he said it, a little bit more simplistically. But I agree with that 100%, which is why I'm not against religion, because I think, like what Ace said, and Ace cited some really powerful verses that are found in the New Testament. And there's some really good stuff. My favorite book in the Bible is actually in Proverbs, but I absolutely love a lot of what is attributed to the mouth of Jesus is very egalitarian, so to speak. And I promote egalitarian ideas because I think that's really important. Although I do think that virtue ethics ultimately is more important than egalitarianism. When we talk about ethics of philosophy, egalitarianism is very important, right? But it's not about equal outcome. It's about equality in general, equal effort, so on and so forth. But yeah, I do think that we are all equals: men, women, children, theists, atheists, agnostics, everybody in between. We need to be respectful of each other, have respectful conversations, but be willing to push back on each other's ideas is very important. I think Ace did a phenomenal job tonight of allowing people, sorry, I hit my phone there, allowing people a chance to express their ideas, and everyone's pushing back respectfully. It's a great conversation. Ace was very open to letting people share their ideas, and I definitely recommend you guys check out his, subscribe to his channel. Check out my channel, Objective Ethics, just after my name, Objective Ethics on YouTube. I do open live streams every Sunday. Ace was there. It's every Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern. He was there today. Check out that show. He did a great job defending the anti-evolution side of which is an argument that he makes. So it was a pretty interesting show today. Really appreciated having everyone's participation. So thank you so much, Andy. It was a pleasure to meet you. I'd love to have you stop by my channel sometime and further our discussion about the history of organized religion and things of that nature. So it's a real pleasure to meet you today.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah. So yeah, and thank you for being here, Objective. Okay, he already left, but yeah, I appreciate all that. And yeah, he has a channel. Can Objective Ethics talk about metaethics? He has his channel. He does that a lot on his channel. He has open panels, so maybe just look up Objective Ethics and try to talk to him there. Yeah, we're doing closing statements, Justin, and it's time for Andy's closing statement. So go ahead, Andy.
All right. And it was nice to officially meet you as well, Daniel. I will stop by your channel next Sunday. As for as for this conversation, I'm going to try to put together a presentation kind of for you, just a verbal one of more of these parallels that I'm talking about with this storm god evolutions to see if I can paint a better picture of that because I'm just going off of memory. But and I'm hopefully next time we bump into each other, I'll have something stitched together that I can, with proper quotes and stuff where I can actually lay it out for you and make a better case than I did tonight. But I think that I just want to close by summarizing. I think that that Yahweh is a continuation of a pre-existing tradition of a storm god being born as a son of the highest God, rising to power over the highest God, defeating the chaos beast and becoming the ruler of all the nations. And this is a repeated tradition that we see across the ancient Near East that spreads in chronological order. And the earliest layers of Yahweh in the Bible fit this pattern exactly. Everything, every single key detail of the storm god tradition, Yahweh checks that box. So my whole point of all of this is that when we think of biblical literature or when we think of Abrahamic religions, if we think of the Quran, if we think of the Kabbalah, if we think of Christianity, if we think of Judaism, all of these concepts hinge on whether or not Yahweh exists. And I think that the evidence is extremely substantial that he is a fictional, mythological deity that was engaging in a pre-existing tradition. But like I said, I'm going to try to make a better case for that. And then next time we bump into each other, I'll be able to hopefully present that to you. But as for tonight, take care. And it was nice chatting with you.
All right. Next time, you made a good case tonight, and also I look forward to seeing whatever other evidence you have to bring, just to give me more to consider as I think about these things. So thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging.
All right, see ya.
All right. Well, I won't take too long to respond to anything. So these are the kinds of arguments that I have. Every broadcast is a little bit different. Sometimes I'm dealing with people within Christianity who are trying to figure out what is Christian doctrine. Here we heard, I think, what there are a lot of people who are, and I'm not criticizing them as being misinformed or bad thinkers, but this is a strong line of how I would say really this kind of arguments are dominant in actual academic institutions. This is the kind of thing that what was being expressed tonight. It's not a fringe idea. These aren't fringe ideas. These are very common within academia, and there are even some uh, believers who will entertain these ideas about the evolution of Christianity being a co-opting of any number of the previous gods that existed. They have, some of them will take, I think Yahweh is more a compilation of the Egyptian, pantheon. Some of them might say Yahweh is more a compilation of the Greek pantheon, or some of them might, like we heard tonight, the Yahweh is borrowed from the Anunnaki. Each person had his own idea of which god the Jews borrowed to create Yahweh. Now, here's the thing. Even if there's a couple things that I want to say before I stop. I don't have much time. Okay, let's just say the Bible is an entire book of myths. Yahweh is just a name for a god, just like Zeus is, or Thor is, or Dionysius is, or Osiris. That does not in any way, shape, or form take away from the mountains of the evidence that some intelligent, creative power exists beyond humanity. First of all, as I said at the beginning of the stream, existence itself is evidence that some creative power exists way beyond anything that humans can imagine. I mean, when you think about this universe, think of how smart a being would have to be to create it. And I know the atheists say there, oh, there's so many problems with the universe. The atheists don't even know how to create a single atom. They don't know anything about creating a universe. They couldn't create their own universe. They couldn't create an entire set of laws of physics that are harmonious with each other, that aren't contradictory in such a way that the universe can't function. I mean, just they don't understand the what it takes to be the foundation for the matter. Where does the matter come from? These are all questions we don't have the beginnings of. So the fact that something exists, it demands an explanation. Then when you get to the harmony of the universe and its laws and how it's fixed and immutable and the complexity of life, and then you get to people having personal experiences that are difficult to explain in materialistic means, and there's all these different arguments about why some God exists. And then you get to
Eli. Oh my gosh. I'm actually giving my closing statement right now. I'm gonna give you 1 minute to just say something, and then I have to continue closing down the stream just because you joined. All right.
Well, I mean, it's kind
Yeah,
of
go ahead. Just 1 minute. Go ahead, because I am shutting. I was giving my closing statement to shut down the stream, but go ahead, minute or two.
Have you ever heard of the transcendental argument?
Yes, I have. I don't think it's a very strong argument, and I can't explain why right now, but it's not an argument that I use to defend God.
Well, here's a question, right? The early Christians were a bunch of lunatics, blah blah blah. But why did they promote cannibalism?
Are you talking about the Eucharist?
You could say so. I mean, that's what the Romans called them. That's what they said they did. It just doesn't make sense why they would claim to do something if it would make them seem as cannibals would.
Well, my opinion about the Eucharist and how the Romans mischaracterized it's very simple to me. I think when you read the passages in question, I think Christ is talking in very symbolic and metaphorical terms. And then the early Catholics, who I'm not a Catholic, I believe they were responsible in many ways for corrupting Christianity, tried to make it seem like it was something very literal, like you're actually drinking.
Let's just stop right there. Let's stop right there, because the earliest Christians after John the Apostle also had the highest Eucharistology that the Catholic Church still holds to. So this idea that they corrupted it is complete nonsense, because Ignatius of Antioch, the disciple of John the Apostle, you can read his writings, and he has a very high Eucharistology, saying that if anyone denies this is the real body and blood of our Lord, let them be a heretic. So it just doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you're saying that it was easily corrupted after the apostles, but that just doesn't make any sense, especially if you look at the totality of the early church fathers, plus what the Romans consider them. Obviously, if Jesus meant it symbolically, why would he triple down on it? He uses the Greek word na there. He uses the Greek word na. He says, truly, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood. Then he also doubles down after the Jews say, what do you mean? Are you a cannibal? And he says, my food is true. My flesh is true food, and my drink, my blood is true drink. Now, he doesn't do that with anything else. And then you look at Paul's writing. What does Paul say? Paul says, whoever eats it in an unworthy manner leads to their physical harm. So it just doesn't really make sense to take it symbolically, especially because the early church didn't take it symbolically. And this idea that it was corrupted by Catholics is complete nonsense. I mean, I don't know how much reading you've done of Ignatius.
I have. I've done a lot. I've done a lot.
So how do you get the idea they corrupted it? Tell me that.
Well, Eli, here's the thing. I have no problem having a very long discussion about anything you want to discuss about Christianity. The problem is I can't do it right now because.
Sure.
But here's that. I will. I want you to stick around for just another few seconds to listen to what I have to say. One thing that's critical in understanding the history of early Christianity is that the Ignatian epistles are 2nd and 3rd century forgeries.
Some of them are.
What's that?
Some of them are, but
no, all of them are. All of them are.
So what historians are you using to make that judgment? Because the majority of historians, including Bart Ehrman, would say that the normal 7 are actually from him at the time that Christians would say they're from.
All right, I'm going to recommend you to someone. You can do your own research. There's there's a channel out there called History Valley, and a number of times on History Valley YouTube channel, they've interviewed a young scholar named Jack Bull. I'm just going to recommend you listen to his YouTube videos, and if you do that enough, and even a number of other people out there, I'm just going to recommend him as one. You will quickly probably realize that the Ignatian epistles are an early Catholic deception meant to instill, presented as very early Christian writings, but were actually written much later for the very specific purpose of things like establishing things that became Catholic doctrine, like the literal Eucharist. So just go ahead and do your own research and come back next time. You're totally welcome. We can have that discussion. But right now I have to shut down the stream.
Take care.
So thank you for being there, for coming. All right. Yeah, Eli, I'm not trying to be rude to you. I really was about to end the stream, and you're certainly welcome back, and we can have that discussion. And if you want to criticize Christianity, that's why I have these. So you're welcome to come back, and we can have that discussion. But right now, I just want to say, the idea. Okay, let me just end this. Yeah, the idea of religion as a control mechanism, absolutely religion has been used as a control mechanism, including Christianity, but that's not because it's taught, that wasn't its function, because there are evil people who've used the truth as a control mechanism. There are a lot of true things, true ideas and good ideas that have been manipulated for people who actually have their own power in mind. So I think that what makes the most sense is that the religions that became the Abrahamic faith were the results of real people having real encounters with God. Some Christians want to believe that the texts are perfectly preserved. Maybe that's the case. I don't have to go that far. I'm willing to admit, even yield, that there were corruptions introduced along the way, including in the text that we currently have them. That's fine. But the origin of it is, God interacting with man to tell man to basically that what he wants from us is to certainly obey him. But what does obedience mean? Read Deuteronomy, read Proverbs, read Isaiah, read all the prophets, read Jesus Christ. They all want us to be good people. They want us to do things that everyone can agree are good for ourselves and for society. Okay, there's a couple things mixed in there in the Isaiah Code. We can dispute that, but when you start talking about the general principle, as Jesus said, the commandments are to love God and love your neighbor. That's the purpose. That's the ultimate goal. That's the summation of everything that's being taught in everything. And then it comes down to, let's get to the specifics and see whether this actually plays out according to what's been taught. But yeah, if you want to say it's a control mechanism, yeah, to control us and make us think that we have to be good people who do what's right to others and what's best for society. I don't have a problem with that. And yeah, people who don't do that should be punished. They should go to jail. They should be made to suffer. And if God wants to judge these people into hell, I don't have a problem with that. They're being warned about what will happen, and they do it anyways. Okay, so. The idea of evil people going to some sort of divine judgment or punishment, I don't have a problem with that at all. And I think it actually makes more sense. And I think what everybody wants, when we look around this world and we see all the evil in it, how could you not want the perfect and true and justice of an eternal and all-wise and all-powerful God? There's nothing wrong with that. So I'm going to end the stream there, and a lot was left on the table. I didn't even respond to all the arguments that were made, but hopefully we will be able to another time. Like and subscribe. Thank you all, and God bless. Till next time.